Hello, good evening, everybody. Got an echo. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting. I am Kate Salmon, and I am, for now, in the chair for the meeting tonight. A welcome to all of the members of the board and to those visiting and attending who are in the room, who are online, and of course to the public who are watching online. So first of all, I will ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out the housekeeping notice.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point at the front of the building in the car park. Finally, please could all ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on laptops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll move to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. I don't believe we've had any apologies for this meeting to date, and therefore item 2, we have no substitute members either for this meeting.
Sorry, Chair, I should just say that the leader is the portfolio holder for one of the items, but she's away on local government business, so she has given her apologies for this.
Okay, yeah, thank you, that's noted. Councillor Wade.
May I also let you know that Oliver Walters is expected and will be slightly late.
Thank you. Okay, that's lovely. So at this point, I now need to hand over to the Vice Chair for the next item, which is the election of the Chair. So I shall do that.
Okay, so can I ask, are there any nominations for Chair? Councillor Trent.
Councillor Salmon.
Okay, thank you. Is that seconded? Okay. Yes, Councillor. Yes. Okay, 2 people seconded. Don't know whose hand was up first there. Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, so in that case, Councillor Salmon is elected unopposed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate that. We move on now, and I'm very happy to carry on, by the way, for another year. So thank you. We move next to the item 4, which is election of the Vice Chair. So may I seek any nominations for the election of the Vice Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Board? Councillor Canavan.
Move Councillor Aikenhead, please.
Certainly. And do I have a seconder for Councillor Aikenhead? Yeah. Two hands again. I think Councillor Waite just got there. Okay. Do we have any other nominations for the position of Vice Chair? Not seeing any indication, in which case Councillor Aikenhead is nominated, is elected as the Vice Chair again. Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Moving on to item 5, we have the declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interests on any items on the agenda that they would like to advise at this point? Nope. Okay, well, if anyone does think of anything as we go through the agenda, please do just let us know. Item 6 is the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 23rd of March. Can I see if we have consensus to accept those as a correct record of the previous meeting?
Yes.
Any dissent? No. Lovely, thank you. That is confirmed. And then we move to item 7, which is the recommendation tracker. This is an item to note, and I don't believe there are any specific updates that I need to make. We do have the outcomes of a set of recommendations coming through as the next item, but we'll take that next. Did anyone have any questions or comments to raise on the recommendation tracker other than what we'll be dealing with under the next item? I don't see any indications. Okay, in which case that is just noted. And we'll move on to item 7A, which is feedback from the Cabinet portfolio holder on recommendations to Cabinet. If I could ask Councillor Andy Martin to join us. Councillor Martin is the portfolio holder for customer communications and culture, and he's going to provide an update to the board on the Cabinet's response to our recommendations on the consultation framework. So I'm going to hand over to Councillor Martin to do that.
Thank you very much, Chair. So first of all, can I thank you and the working group and Councillor Aikenhead as well. I know you both chaired it at different times for the work on this really important subject. We have all discussed consultation quite a lot over the last 3 years. We know how challenging the consultation process can be and has been. And having discussed with Cabinet colleagues actually today, your report and the feedback on that, they've asked me to pass on their thanks as well, because it's a hugely important piece of work that you've done and very much welcomed, with probably just one caveat, which I'll come to. It helped me to sort of think about consultation again. Sometimes I try to put it out of my mind, but it's helped me focus on it again. And we all know the challenges of consultation, especially in the febrile political times we live in, where nobody really has much trust in public sector, and particularly in local authorities, I think, although it's not just peculiar to local authorities. So that does present us with considerable problems in terms of the integrity of the consultation processes. Some people see it as a box ticking exercise, quite literally. Some people feel that their input doesn't matter and that the outcome is already predetermined. And of course, with social media, at worst, some consultations can be skewed and some can be, at worst, hijacked. So in that context, this is a really valuable piece of work. And as I said before, welcomed by my Cabinet colleagues. I think one of the recommendations to the officers, I think I'm taking in terms of, rather than Lisa and Isla, who are on the call and I think will give their input shortly. So the item about the Chief Executive bringing the consultation forward plan to group leaders, I'll just feedback on that from Cabinet, which is we don't have a problem with that. I mean, I think in the interest of openness and transparency, that should be something that everybody should be aware of. What we're consulting on shouldn't be a secret, isn't a secret. So that's not an issue at all. Everything else, bar item 2 on the report feedback from Cabinet, and I'm just want to just say a few words on this issue of 1 week advance notice of going live. Now, you know, we have talked previously, the committee's talked previously about the issue of trust, and again, you know, we are entering, aren't we, in the next 12 months, a difficult period, I think, for the council in terms of people preparing for the elections in 2027. Everybody's going to be looking for an edge, and I don't want consultation to be a casualty of that. We do know that every now and then the issues of consultations can be leaked in advance, politicising the process, you might say, really, before it gets a public say, locking people's positions in, risks of misinformation and cynicism and incomplete information. I think this issue of trust really goes to the heart of the whole consultation process, and I hope, you know, clearly around this table, I know we can all agree with that. And I must say, I know that the request to look at to have this information in advance a week comes from a really genuine point of view, a genuine place where people want to know what's going in their ward, and not for any sort of malevolent reason. So on that basis, I think it's important to recognise that and to I think Cabinet is in principle okay with that, but we just obviously want to flag up the possibility that that might backfire on us at some point, backfire on the council. And clearly the integrity of the consultation process is in everybody's it's in all our interests that it's robust and its integrity is intact. So my plea would be to all members of the council that, you know, however we go forward with this, that everybody, you know, nobody breaches that trust, and that we can maintain that integrity of the process. I mean, I think with that, I'll finish, but hand over to Isla and Lisa, and then obviously answer any further questions if there are any after they've spoken.
Thank you.
Sorry, I do apologise. It's not for me to hand over to Isla, it's for you, isn't it? So apologies.
It's fine. Thank you, Councillor Martin. And yes, Isla, are you, would you like to come in and say a few things as well?
Yeah,
You're
evening
welcome.
Chair, evening councillors. Yes, so the recommendations for officers, we're really happy to take those forward. As Andy said, we will take the forward plan to group leaders, and I think you've also recommended that officers provide greater clarity as to about why particular consultation methods were chosen. So we've got a method of doing that, probably via a table when we look at the documentation that we send around. So really pulling that out at the beginning of each consultation. And then the third recommendation around considering a robust consultation, we do that already, but we will make sure that that's kind of highlighted at every point we give advice as well.
Thank you. That's great. So I think I'll open up to the board now to have an opportunity to respond to anything that they've just heard in terms of that feedback. Did anyone want to start us off? If not, I'm happy to say a few words. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, the one area of consultation that always worries me is that sometimes we find out about the consultation or it actually going live the same time as it goes to the media. I've read stuff in the Echo the same day that I've found out via an email to all members that the consultation was going live, and I wonder whether we can avoid doing that and at least give members an advance notice of that. I know that there are some that will then use it to get a head start on it for their own reasons. You know, we do have some members, none present, I don't think, that do jump the gun on things like that, but it would be useful, particularly if it's something that affects our individual wards and so on. You know, we need to know ahead of the game so that we don't get taken by surprise by anything that we read in the Echo or read online in the Echo, as most people do. But, you know, I actually read the paper copy.
Yes, Councillor Martin, did you want to come in on that?
I think I'll pass that to Isla, but what I would say is in my previous life, I used to love it when councillors complained they read it in the Echo first rather than being told by the council. I take a slightly different view now, you'll be pleased to hear, but I think Isla might want to come in on that.
Chair, are you happy for me to come in?
Yes, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, I think the recommendations will cover that, because the recommendations are to inform group leaders and members with a good amount of notice. I think, as Andy outlined before, I think previously we've been cautious around more controversial political subjects, but I think we know the recommendations going forward will cover that, informing all members, but not just ward members, ahead of a consultation.
Okay, so if I can just clarify where we've got to here, just so I'm really sure. From what you said, Councillor Martin, it sounds as though, broadly speaking, and yourself, Isla, both of you, broadly speaking, that the recommendations have been accepted, which is great. I'm really glad to hear that, because it was quite a significant piece of work. It spread over a long period of time and encompassed quite a lot of different things that kind of shifted and changed through the time that the working group was established. So it does represent quite a significant piece of work that this board's carried out. I'm really pleased to hear that on the whole that the recommendations are being accepted. I just would like some clarification around that second one. Is that am I hearing that one can't be that one recommendation can't be accepted about the 1 week's notice? But I sort of will do our best. We'll see what we can do. Am I taking that correctly?
I think that's a very very fair summary, and I think it's one of those things where we could trial it, and then if you know if that breach of trust was broke, if that trust was broken, I think we'd have to have a look at it again. But you know, that's why I put that plea out to all councillors to, you know, to recognise the importance of the integrity of the consultation process. We'll see what happens.
So if we can say wherever possible,
Yeah, I think
the
that would be
notice will be
fair.
given. And I think Councillor Trent's point around if it's a ward specific issue, ward councillors getting that heads up is also that's quite a key thing, isn't it? Even if it's not every councillor. Yeah.
Could I just I know I said a few thanks at the beginning, but I'd really like to thank Lisa Stutchbury and her team, and obviously by implication Isla as well, because you know consultation is a bit of a thankless task sometimes, and I know you know it can be a rough ride. So I just want to put it on record again that they do a great job, and really grateful for that. And once again, thank you for this is a great piece of work. So thank you to your board.
Well, thank you very much for coming and giving us that feedback. And yes, it's equally, I would like to say thank you to Lisa and Isla, because they worked really hard on this, with put a lot of time into doing this with us. And I think it was good. I think we did come out with a good set of recommendations. So yeah, I echo that as well. All right, I think we can move on. Thank you very much, Councillor Martin. Thank you, Isla. Thank you, Lisa, who's here as well. We'll move on to item 8, which is public issues. I don't believe we've had any public issues, is that correct? Okay, so no public issues. We move straight on then to item 9, which is on the local plan process. I understand that Councillor Moore is going to take the place of the leader who's unable to be here specifically for this purpose, who's unable to be here this evening to present this this paper. And we also have colleagues from the planning policy. We have Wendy Lane, the Director of Planning and Transport, in the room. We have Caroline Peach, Head of Strategic Planning, and Steve Dring, the Planning Policy Manager, online. So I will hand over to Councillor Moore, I think, to start off by presenting this paper to us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was actually just going to say a few words because obviously Councillor Milliel, as we know, is the portfolio holder, but she's unable to attend the board tonight, and she does send her apologies. She will, though, be presenting this report at the next Cabinet meeting on the 27th of May. But this paper is all about the local plan process, which follows on from the government's published regulations and guidance to enable the work to commence on preparing a new local plan for BCP Council. And tonight we have some very able officers who are going to present the report and answer any questions. But if you do have any feedback you'd like me to pass on to Councillor Earl, please do let me know and I'll be happy to share with her. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. That's great. So I'm handing over now to, I don't know, Wendy, Steve or Caroline? Who's going first? Steve.
I was going to, yeah.
Great. I'll hand over to Steve Dring. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So just a very brief presentation. You'll be aware that we tried to produce a local plan, the BCP local plan. We took it to examination and we had to withdraw it, unfortunately. So we're still without a local plan for the BCP area. We have a number of very out of date now local plans from our previous legacy authorities, and we need to update them. Now, preparing a local plan is a mandatory process that is required. There's a whole new set of regulations produced by government to produce them quicker as well, so that we can plan the homes quicker and get the homes built quicker. So we're now starting that new process. It takes us 30 months from the date that we initiate the process to the point we adopt a local plan. So that is a very speedy process. Local plans have worked on over the years, generally 5 years in the making. So this would be a super quick process. There's a number of things that have been put in to help with that, which will help speed it up. But what we're here to talk to you about today is the timetable. So it sets out how we're going to do what we're going to do at each stage for that 30 months. We're asking for permission to commence a scoping consultation, which is right at the start of the process, what we do is we write to everybody. We're only supposed to write to consultation bodies and say, this is what we're going to include in the plan. Do you agree? Is there anything else we should include in the plan? And this is how we're going to engage with you. But we feel in the spirit we should engage with the whole public as well and ask them their views at this stage as to what should be in the local plan. So that's feeding on from your last agenda item, hopefully seen as a positive in terms of trying to communicate as much as possible and engage. So that's a scoping consultation. That will initiate the 30-month period. Okay, so that will start plan making over the 30 months. What we also want to add to the paper, it was added to the paper late, was to introduce some governance in terms of setting up a working group, which will help us as officers work with councillors, and it'll be cross-party to look at all of the issues and analyse all of that evidence and the strategy going forward. So that's in the papers as well, and Caroline's here to answer questions on that today. Now, in terms of how many times you're going to see the local plan, as overview and scrutiny, you've got today to agree the timetable, and in theory there's 2 consultation stages. One this October, which is in the plan content and evidence. That's when we'll consult for 6 weeks on pretty much all the evidence we've got, a draft vision, a draft strategy, all the sites, for example, everything we've got. We put it all out there and we say to everyone, what do you think? So you'll have a chance to look at that before it goes for consultation or before it goes through cabinet agreement. Then all the way through 2027, we spend the time refining the evidence, refining the strategy. That's where the working group and really will do a lot of work to help with that. And then round about, what was it? It's about September 2027, so September next year, we'll come back to ONS again with the final draft plan. So in terms of ONS's, points where you can influence, you've got those 2 consultations. Now it's whether you want to be involved in any more of the process going through alongside the working group. That can be for debate tonight, I suggest. After we do the draft plan at the end of next year, we then go and see the consultation response, and then we submit it to government for examination. By then it's too late to change anything. Okay, so that's what I just wanted to set out today, is where you can. Now, one of the important things that we do have to do going forward is, and the way government's helping us, they're providing us with templates to make writing a local plan a lot simpler and easier and consistent across the country. And key thing they're doing is introducing development management policies, national development management policies. So these, whereas we write probably 30 or 40 policies in every local plan, setting out all of our local requirements, and often they repeat things that are done by lots of other authorities, government is currently consulting on a series of these policies that will become government policies, and we're not supposed to repeat those. And so that will help in terms of reducing the time or the amount of time we need to produce the plan. It also, just to finally say on that, it gives us limits in terms of the scope of what we can do in a local plan. So for example, in the last local plan, we were looking at very much at what we can do in terms of climate change, in terms of sustainable homes and sustainable buildings, what we can ask for extra, whether we can ask for solar panels on the roof, etc. Government made it very clear this time that our policies can't go beyond national policy, and the national policy is determined by the building regulations, for example. So we can't spend time looking at how we can make a home more sustainable. That's covered by national policy. So happy to discuss any of these points. That is my intro.
That's great. Thank you very much, Steve. At this point, did Wendy or Caroline want to come in, or would it be better to open up to questions on what we've heard so far?
I think it might be better to open up, and then
Yes.
we can. I'm sure we'll cover most things.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll do that. So, who'd like to give to start off with any questions or any comments on what we've got here in front of us? Councillor Wright.
That one. Yeah, the 30-month end date for this is 2029. September 29, and the deadline for you completing it is January of that year. Is that a bit tight, or do you think you'll get it done in that time?
It's extremely tight. It's going to be challenging. The timetable is set up out on page 55 of the report, and just to be clear, so we'd submit the plan, the final draft plan, for examination in May 2028. and then we'd look to go through examination 6 months, and we'd adopt it at the end of 2028 or early into 2029. So that's the end of the 30-month period. But yes, we've got to get the bulk of the work done before we produce a draft local plan, and that draft local plan is by September 2027, so 18 months from now. That's when the majority of this work will be done.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, sorry, Councillor Canavan, did you indicate?
Yeah.
I missed that.
Well, I'm probably going against the grain here, but I wanted to ask whether there was any way of speeding this up. Because frankly, although you said it's super quick, it feels excruciatingly slow, given that I seem to have been talking about local plans ever since I was elected in 2013. So 2023 rather. So that's my basic question. But my other question really is, I'm trying to understand what the purpose of the consultation around scoping is, because it feels as though it's consultation about consultation. So it would be good to understand exactly what that is supposed to be achieving. How is that going to add to the sum of knowledge in terms of the local plan, other than to shape the framework, which you've already told us is going to be pretty much prescribed by national policies anyway?
Yeah, that's a good point. In terms of the timetable, this is the quickest we can bring it forward for the 30 months. You'll see in the options appraisal there's a backstop, which is the last point we can actually initiate this is in December 2026. So we're starting this 6 months ahead of sort of the backstop. So we're trying to do it as soon as we can. In terms of the scoping consultation, this is set by the regulations. We haven't had much government guidance on this yet as to what's in it. We're just having to the regulations are coming out on sort of a monthly basis, and we're having to start this process without all of the guidance and regulations being in place. From what we gather, it is basically simply as just setting to everyone, this is what we think is the scope of our local plan. Do you agree? Have we missed anything? There's 3 questions which we've included in Appendix 2. So Appendix 2 sets out the consultation document itself. And that's all it is. It's very simple. Have we missed anything, basically, at this early stage that we should be looking at? And, you know, some of the consultation bodies, such as Natural England, for example, obviously very key in this area in terms of what we do, might say, well, actually, you do need to look at this issue, for example, in this local plan. It hasn't been an issue before, but it will be an issue for this local plan, such as I know there are a number of new issues they've raised already that I'm aware of. So it's an opportunity for those bodies to do that. The public themselves to identify issues that they might find some issues that we haven't really thought about tackling through the local plan. So there's an opportunity for that as well. And then in terms of how we engage, we've just set out how we engage, which is to do all of the traditional approaches that we do with local plan to try and give as many people the opportunity to comment as possible. It's not a brilliant consultation because it's not very meaty. It's not like saying, oh, here's our development strategy, what do you think? That's what we'll be doing in October, November, and that's when we'll get a lot more feedback and a lot of I'm hopeful, very good dialogue and you know, discussion about what is the best way forward.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask one quick follow-up on that before we move on, and then I see we have others indicating. Just to be clear then, the scoping consultation, is that a mandatory part of the process that's sort of set out within the government framework for how the new plan has to be developed? Yeah.
Yes. So it's exactly that. It's a statutory bit with not much guidance telling us what to do. So we're all second guessing, trying to establish what the best way. In the past, what we have generally done when we started a local plan, we always used to just write to everyone to say, we started the local plan process. Is there any issues you want us to address? It's kind of covering that as well. We also would write to Environment Agency, Natural England, and forget the third one off the top of my head, Historic England, and ask them if there are any issues they wanted us to cover. And that was part of the sustainability appraisal scoping consultation that we did. So that was a way you'd not formally kick off a local plan process in the old system. The new system, they've replaced it with this scoping consultation, which can involve a lot more statutory bodies. So it's expanding it on what we probably did previously to cover. There's a lot of named bodies that we have to consult, National Highways, etc. We would have consulted them anyway, but it's just formalising that process so that everyone is consistent across the country.
Thank you. So I think Councillor Waite also and Councillor Beasley. So I've just seen. I'm going to go to Councillor Aikenhead next because she did indicate first.
Okay.
That's the trend.
Okay, so I've got, sorry, put that on. I have got 3 different things that I want to ask about. So shall I do them one at a time and get?
Let's start with one at a time,
Okay.
shall we?
Right. So the first one is about the consultation. So relating back to the previous item about the consultation framework, one of the things that we was quite important that came out of the working group was that it's not always the best way to consult by just putting out a survey to everyone. We may want to put a survey to everyone, but we may want to supplement that with some other types of consultation just to make sure that it's not just the loudest voices that are being heard and the quiet voices are not being heard. There were some ideas that we threw about in the working group. So I just noticed in this, it just really said that there was going to be a consultation of like a survey for everyone. And I just first wanted to ask, have you considered using some other methods, maybe like having maybe randomized groups of people, just to make sure that the survey answers, particularly on the big consultation when you do it, to check that your survey answers are representative of our whole population.
Yeah, I mean, this is always one of the main concerns we have whenever we write local plan is, do we just hear from the people that speak loudest, or do we hear from, or how can we engage the people that, it takes too long to fill forms in, for example. And something we learned, I think, with the last local plan was we had quite a long, complicated consultation form that put people off actually responding. So it's trying to find a way of consulting that's easy and snappy, simple 3 questions on, do you agree with, do you want to see more housing? Do you want it to be here? Do you want it to be there? Trying to do that in a better way and trying to find ways to do this. Page 89 of the papers includes how we intend to engage, but as you say, it doesn't specifically say anything beyond the standard do a consultation survey. I think we can definitely explore different ways of doing it. There have been a number of ways of doing that over the years, trying to engage as many people as possible, particularly at this October-November consultation, because that's when we really need to get views to shape the direction of the strategy and the vision and what sites will be included and what won't. So absolutely, we'll do that, and we'll have that conversation which we haven't done yet, because we're just starting the process with the consultation team on the options available to us.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to go on to your next point, Councillor?
Yes, that would be great. My next point is about, I noticed that in there it said out of scope is the neighbourhood level of detail, because that would be covered by neighbourhood plans. Some of our areas have neighbourhood plans, but others don't. Does this document imply that there is a move to create neighbourhood plans for the rest? And if so, would that be up to this council or the town councils to do it?
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. So, so the reason, if you remember the last local plan that we took through, that was failed at examination, but what we did was we had a part 1, which was all our strategic policies, and then we had a part 2 where we worked with the councils in every ward to do a very much a ward-based policy. It was very detailed to the point of, we want to change this public space to do this, or we want to add a bench here, or we want to do this. That was kind of a lot of detail and took a lot of our time. Because of the 30-month timeline and the fact we've only really got a year, 18 months to sort out a strategy to deliver all the major infrastructure and strategic side of things, it's better to focus this local plan on the strategy side. It doesn't stop all that stuff being done in terms of that local level detail. Now, how that's done, there's 2 different ways you could do it. You could do it through what's called a supplementary plan, which can be done alongside a local plan or following on from the local plan, or through a neighbourhood plan, as you say. So neighbourhood plans have to be now produced by the town or parish council area generally. So What you'd look at probably is a Poole or a Bournemouth one or a Broadstone one, or the parishes within Christchurch. You can do smaller than that, but you'd need to get the agreement of the town council for your areas. I'm particularly thinking in terms of Bournemouth and Poole. So say some of the smaller areas that have been looking to do their own neighbourhood plans would need to seek the agreement of the town council to do a smaller area. So there's still the options to do all that and to provide all that level of detail, and that is exactly what neighbourhood planning is there to do. So we would support that and work with people to help them deliver those neighbourhood plans. It's best to wait though until the strategic policies are done, the strategic direction is done, is understood through the local plan, because then that helps shape where growth is going to be and what the vision is going to be, and then neighbourhood plans can feed off that and deliver the local level of detail.
So can I just check, as a supplementary question, does that mean the work that we did last time isn't being thrown away and we could still use that to make supplementary plans afterwards? Because it would be a shame to throw away all that work that was already done.
It's certainly not thrown away, it's still sitting there. It just, we're not intending to include it in this local plan. We're going to have a template presumably from government as well on how to produce the local plan in 30 months really quickly. That template hasn't been produced yet, but we imagine it's going to be quite succinct, looking at very succinct local plans. So there's probably not going to be the opportunity to put all of that information in anyway. So I think we've got that information, it's still there in the public domain. It can be saved for a supplementary plan or a neighbourhood plan to deliver that at a later date.
Right, sorry that I've got so many questions, but it's yeah, I suppose it's important. That's what scrutiny is, isn't it? The last thing I want to ask about is the on the agenda supplement, which is the working group. So I noticed that the working group is politically balanced, and so I've got a few questions, but I'll ask them all, and then you can, because they're kind of related, and you can answer them all together. So first of all, as it's politically balanced, how can we ensure that we have balance across Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch? It mentions that it will be confidential. I just want to, and the group the members of the working group will need to keep things confidential. Can I just check if they're there representing their political groupings? Does that mean they can share that information with other councillors, or is it intended just to be confidential to the group itself? It says there will be no substitutions. Just want to comment that that doesn't work, because we tried that with the community governance review, and what happens is just causes extra admin, because when you want to substitute someone, you just resign somebody and put somebody else in, and then they have to resign again and put somebody else in. So no substitutions doesn't really work. And I just wanted to ask, it said about having smaller task and finish groups as a level below the the main task and finish group. Will those be all part of those same 16 people, or can that be other people from the council who are interested, other councillors who are interested in those particular topics?
Thank you, Councillor Wickenden. If I can just, I wonder if at this point Caroline should perhaps give us a little bit of an overview of the working group proposal, and just for the board's benefit, hopefully everyone did see that it was a late addition, an agenda supplement that gives the information about the proposals for this working group. Would that be all right, Caroline, if you just, addressing Sue's questions, but also just giving us a bit more in the round about that particular aspect? Thank you.
Chair, are you happy if I share my screen so that I can sort of share the paperwork? Is that okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Does that come up on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that has. Thank you. Thank you. I just thought it might be easy if I just have a quick go through this, because obviously you had the paperwork, the main paperwork that Steve's been explaining and going through, and you've been answering questions on. And this paperwork has come through as part of the supplemental and come through therefore a little bit late. So I thought it might be worth having a few moments to go through it in case you've not had a chance to to see that in advance. And my apologies that this draft terms of reference wasn't in the original circulation. This is just down to timing of the clarification of the process for agreement, but we do have opportunity now to discuss it and to make those points to Cabinet. So I hope you'll bear with me as we kind of have a quick look through together. I just wanted to highlight some things in pink to you, just some kind of key points. The purpose of the group is to provide the cross-party involvement and scrutiny in the preparation of the BCP local plan. So in a similar way to a previous working group, the working group is to interrogate and discuss the evidence that's emerging in relation to the local plan and how that will inform the sort of spatial policy implications of the plan. It's not a decision-making group, but it will provide a positive consultative role to support and inform the decision-making by Cabinet. Cabinet is not, however, obliged to adopt the recommendations arising from this group, but obviously will take on board the comments received. The membership of the local plan working group will be politically balanced, as has been noted by Councillor Aikenhead, and as is sort of set out at a moment in time, on the 14th of October, just at that moment in time, perhaps there's an opportunity for discussion about whether a different moment in time needs to be noted here, and the potential implications of that. But the suggestion here is for 15 people in that political balance, and then offering a further additional seat to be shared amongst the smallest groups, to enable that full spread of political representation, so that you'd actually end up with a total number of 16 members on the group, which is a fairly large group, but hopefully will be then representative and give that broad involvement, awareness, and general input into shaping of the local plan. Each political group leader can appoint a representative to fill the seats allocated, and the group leaders will be expected to aim to have a representative from each of the overview and scrutiny committees and board. And that's where this time around, with the working group, we're looking to try and engage more with the overview and scrutiny function from the council, and to sort of make those connections. So it's not a duplication, it's a kind of trying to sort of involve them sort of as part of that sort of 16. I have noted on here, and has been mentioned, about the substitute members not being permitted. Perhaps I'll come back to that in a moment. There'll be a chair to chair the meetings, working with officers for setting meeting dates and agenda. There'd be a vice chair, as would be sort of expected, to cover meetings the chair couldn't make. And representatives of the overview and scrutiny committees and board will provide that dual function of being both a contributor to the discussions about the evidence, but also that rapporteur role, reporting back to relevant committees and boards and updating them on the work of the working group. That does come with a bit of a caveat, which is that mention of confidentiality, particularly at those formative stages, and it's particularly sort of important because of that need for open and frank discussion in those early stages, so that people feel that they can explore options and opportunities early on. Again, I'll come back to sort of some of the rationale behind that. And so the group is set to really get to grips with the evidence, the options and the emerging policies, and make those recommendations to Cabinet. And then there's the sort of key decision-making stages, which are probably linked to sort of the formal Cabinet stages, but there are probably some informal stages where there's opportunities for the working group to report back and get a steer from the CMB Cabinet in sort of informally. So do anticipate there being a kind of a strong connection there with the working group and that CMB Cabinet as part of that. So yeah, looking for that engagement and connections sort of across the council is essentially, and this group, this overview and scrutiny board, will be the main formal scrutiny for the local plan. So just to go back on the comment about the sort of substitutions point, I hadn't heard that there'd been an issue with substitutions as such. The reasons that we've suggested in this terms of reference, draft terms of reference, is substitutes not to be permitted, is because it's a fairly lengthy piece of work that really needs continuity. It's difficult to dip in and out of the subject matter that's being that's sort of being engaged with here and wrestled with here, learning about the evidence, getting to grips with it, understanding it, and where the continuity of story and where things have come from. I think that is difficult to dip in and out of, and that's really one of the reasons why we're suggesting not to have those sort of substitutes in this case. In reference to the confidentiality, really did see this as being within the group of the 16, so that there's a principle of not sharing even with your other group members, really, that it's confidential to the group of 16. That's not to say that we'll be able to explain parts that aren't so confidential or wouldn't be a problem. So, but I think it's just starting with that principle. In reference to the smaller task and finish groups, will they be part of the 16? I would imagine they would again need to be as part of that, but I'm open for sort of a wider exploration of what that might look like. But we definitely need expertise outside of the group, but that's partly what will be being fed in from consultants, etc. But the I didn't really see that going beyond the group of 16, because that's already still quite a big group and reasonably complex to work with from an officer point of view, but that's just my point of view. Yeah, happy to take any comments or questions. I hope that's helpful.
One of my questions you didn't.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Councillor Aikenhead, did you want to just come back in there?
Yeah, there was just one question which wasn't answered about what about balance across Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch?
Yes, I think that might come down to well, it's difficult to get a balance on absolutely everything. This is a group that's trying to be as inclusive as possible by going across the different political groups. It's trying to be, but also politically balanced, and that's actually quite difficult. I understand your point around the 3 areas. If that can be included, it's going to come down to this section about each political group can appoint a representative to fill the seats allocated. So I think it's sort of within the gift of those who are being appointed, or those who are doing that appointment, to try to do that. It wasn't something that we felt we could include as another thing to try and achieve, when it's actually already quite tricky from an officer point of view to set out in this document.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I want to move on because we have other people waiting to speak. So Councillor Waite, I think, was next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. I think Steve, in his opening remarks, mentioned opportunities for councillors to get involved, and I don't know if I understood correctly, but what I think I understood was that if we wanted that, then we should build that into the timetable now, and we're perhaps responsible for avoiding councillors being very frustrated in 12 to 18 months' time, and then being told, well, we should have sorted out the timetabling. But I honestly don't really know what I should be doing. I've not really done this before, so perhaps the officers can tell us how this has worked before, or how this works in other councils, just to give us an idea of what should we be considering for giving members opportunities to contribute to the process.
Okay, thank you. So go ahead, Steve. Yeah.
Yep. Shall I come in here? So when we did the last local plan, for example, we used a working group as well, and then we produced a draft local plan to go to cabinet. Now the draft local plan has got a lot of information, a lot of stuff, and we had one overview and scrutiny meeting to cover what was in it, and there is a lot of stuff to cover in one evening. So that is one of the, I would say, not the best way to do it, because you've only a week before cabinet, the officers have drafted the plan, it's in the position that we think is right, and then it's a very late involvement of councillors to try and then shape that document at that stage. So it's about trying to think about how we can timetable in some meetings that would look at certain issues, look at certain bits of evidence, for example, the housing needs evidence, the green belt review, the employment needs evidence, all these bits of evidence that we're getting completed, to look at them in detail, to scrutinise them, and then look at the strategy that's coming out of that for where growth should be, and seeing if that's the right strategy for our town centres, for our communities, etc. So there's a number of opportunities to do that. The working group can do that. That's what the working group will be there to do, and we'll probably be meeting on a very regular basis to do that. But ONS might also want to be involved in that process, and timetable certain things in, or certain certain regular intervals to look at certain specific issues to help shape that. What I was saying in my introduction was, because we're going out for a planned content and evidence consultation this October, that's basically got to set out a draft vision. So we've got to do a SWOT analysis of the vision. We'd appreciate, obviously, the working group can look at this as well, but this is something ONS could look at, that vision. We're then going to just put out all the evidence that we've got out for public consultation. Here's all the sites, and here's a draft strategy. So again, it's how we look at shaping that draft strategy that's coming out of the evidence. So that's this October. That doesn't leave us very much time to produce that. Well, I'd say the best time is probably after that, once we've gone public with everything, is looking possibly in a much more detailed look at what went into that consultation, all of the various bits, and how we take that forward to turn that into strategy. And looking as well, a very important part of that will be the consultation feedback we get in October, to see what the community thinks of everything we've got and how we take it forward. So vision is the initial one we need to look at, what we want BCP to look like. So it's not repeating just the corporate vision, but trying to look, we're going to have a template produced by government that says this is what the vision needs to set out. We haven't got that yet, but so that will happen sometime this summer. So we can produce that to then publish that alongside consultation, and then throughout 2027 to sort of really get into the teeth, get your teeth into the evidence and look at the detail and then shape the strategy. I think that's my thinking, the best way it will work. But like I say, you've got to avoid the duplication of the working group. So what's the role of the working group here, and what's the role of ONS? I've seen other councils try and do ONS meetings about early stages, sort of, these are the housing sites we want to look at, let's do them in an ONS meeting. You end up with 300 people turned up at the ONS meeting to make sure their site isn't included, for example, and ONS becomes more of a it doesn't work effectively, is what I'm saying, because you're at that point, you haven't even thought how the sites are going to be allocated, what they're going to do, but everyone's coming in saying, no, we're very worried about all these sites. So that's better done by the working group, I feel. Once we've gone public with everything, we've got all of the sites that we've got, they're in the public domain, then provides that opportunity to probably look at those in detail, because they're known to everybody, and try and decide whether that is a good site to go forward with or not. So that would be the role for 2027. That's a very long-winded answer, but what I'm trying to say is, I think the best way to go is to work with the working group and to involve ONS as well, so that you're at various points to look at certain specific topics that you think are relevant, or the working group's informing you is relevant to maybe tackle. Because the working group isn't a decision-making body, and it can recommend, ONS can also recommend, so it provides that that opportunity.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I've understood that ONS can choose to kind of dip in the future at the appropriate time, and we're not precluded from doing so by what we decide on today. So that's assuring, if I've understood that right. And also, when we say that we're starting now rather than December, are we really saying we're going to start as soon as government publish that template that you keep mentioning?
Okay, so we're going to start. So this cabinet paper is to actually start the process. So we'll initiate the plan making, the 30 months. We're still going to be operating a little bit in the dark in the fact that we don't have those templates yet. They're going to be coming through in the summer, so that we can then do the vision. We can then do the consultation later in the year. But the scoping consultation doesn't need a template. That's an easy one. We just write to people with 3 questions, so we can get on and do that. So this paper is to start the process off, get everyone, kick off the 30 months, and start the process going. We'll have the time to do the formal stuff later. You don't need to set when you need to be involved now. I suggest you have the opportunity to ask to see this. The problem is, you normally look at when cabinet papers come forward and say, this is a cabinet paper we want to look at. As I said at the start, there's only 3 opportunities. There's today for this paper, there's the consultation we're doing in September, and then there's a consultation this October, then there's a consultation next September, September 2027. Those are the 3 times that Cabinet will be involved. So those are the 3 times ONS would be involved. But how it works in terms of being asking to see the plan at different stages or asked to see the feedback from the consultation, I'm not quite sure on how the process works for you to ask to do that, but I'm sure there is a way you can do that.
If I can just come in on that a little bit, we have in our work programme that we agreed in the winter, we have put in space for proactive scrutiny of the local plan, which is yet to be determined exactly what we'll do with those spaces, but they've been built in because we know that this is a priority area that the board wants to make sure it has time for. So this was really our first go at looking at the new local plan process, and this is meant to give us a bit more of an idea of when we might put those sessions in and what they might cover. But I don't think we have to nail everything down in today. And one of the things I think is I really like the proposal about trying to make sure that the membership of the working group dovetails with the overview and scrutiny function across all, not just the board, but all the committees, so that there's that linkage between the two, and that hopefully whoever that person or people might be from this board, for example, who end up in the working group, they can take a bit of a role to come back to the board and say, well, it's heading in this direction, or there's this thing that might be quite interesting for us to look at, and they'll provide that link, which I think could be really, really valuable to the board. I hope that helps a bit. Moving on then, I think where do we get to? Oh yeah, Councillor Beasley was next.
Thank you very much,
Got a
Chair.
queue.
I have got 6 items, and it strikes me that this is the only opportunity to raise them, so I would like to raise all 6 of them.
That's okay.
I'll deal with the one that's at the bottom of the list simply because Councillor Aikenhead raised it just now, and it is therefore current in people's minds, and it's the issue of the working group not being allowed to have substitutes and the confidentiality issue. If we learnt anything out of the local government's review working group process, those 2 items were right up there at the very top, and I don't think this council covered itself in glory as a result, and I think we need to learn from that. I certainly will be very unhappy if substitutes are not permitted for the reasons that the Vice Chair has already set out, and the issue of confidentiality, particularly amongst colleague councillors, simply didn't work, and it won't work next time either. And all it will cause is friction and problems. And I think if we want this to work, and we do, we really, really do this time, then we need to forget about that because it is going to get in the way. And it's going to make it very much more difficult, not just in my own group, but in any group, about communications with other councillors. If we're going to be open and transparent, we at least need to trust councillors, all of whom are signed up to the Act anyway, and thereby should be allowed to be able to discuss amongst themselves as well. So that's my first one. But could I go back to my original other 5? The first 2 actually dovetail into each other, and I think probably both for Mr. Dring to respond to. And I've been very impressed by your presentation thus far, Mr. Dring, so well done for the work that you've obviously committed to. So previously BCP Council withdrew, and I think my question on that is, what have the consequences been, not just for the local authority, but for the people we serve, be they residents or be they business, or be they other people involved in the planning process? And secondly, within that question, have there been any sanctions employed, particularly by government or by other bodies, as a result of that? Just so that I can get an idea of our position statement, if you like. And I'll come to the other ones one by one, if I may, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to respond to those points, Steve, first?
Yes. So firstly, in terms of the consequences, one of the reasons we were trying to get the last local plan put in place was to try and update all of our policies we've got. We've got over 300 policies from a number of out-of-date local plans. We've got no up-to-date housing strategy. A local plan allows you to have an up-to-date housing strategy. What that means is that when you don't have an up-to-date housing strategy, you don't have what's called a 5-year supply of housing sites. And developers can put in planning applications applying what is called the tilted balance, that we should be looking to approve planning permission for housing in the absence of a demonstrable 5-year housing land supply. Now, I'm not aware of us losing any 5-year land supply arguments at appeal that are consequential over the period since 2025 when we drew the plan. We've been in a position not having a 5-year land supply across the BCP area for quite a long time anyway, so this has been a number of years we've been in this problem. But there always seem to be a number of other issues that come up with any planning application here that means that it's often refused for other reasons rather than simply being allowed because it's housing. So so that's one thing in the balance and as time goes on, there's going to be more and more impacts. Now, one of the things that government is doing that is very important, that's changed since that local plan was withdrawn, is that government's introduced grey belts as a national policy. So what we're seeing now is, and what it allows people to do, it allows developers to build or put in a planning application to build within the green belt. And what they do is they argue that this isn't green belt, this is grey belt, because it's got a number of, it doesn't hit the true meaning of green belt. And there's a number of tests they can do, and they have to provide infrastructure, etc., and affordable housing, 50% affordable housing. These sort of things happening in the are starting to happen. We're starting to see planning applications coming in for that. But that is not really a change to what's happened with the local plan failing. That's more a change to what's happened with government policy. But obviously, if we did have a local plan in place, it would have helped to have had a clear steer on what we're doing. But government's changed the whole rules on green belt. So that's one thing to be aware of. The sooner we get a plan in place, the sooner we can control where development goes in our green belt, because we're getting lots of applications saying this bit of green belt is actually grey belt. We should be putting housing there. And as we don't have a 5-year land supply, it puts us in a weaker position in terms of arguing that that should not be allowed. So that is an issue we do need to be aware of. In terms of sanctions, there haven't been any sanctions employed upon us. Under the law, we were supposed to produce a local plan within 5 years, and that is what we attempted from local government reorganisation, and that is what we attempted to do. Unfortunately, that law was not seen as important as the law about the duty to cooperate, to work with our neighbours, when the local plan examination took place, and the fact that we hadn't had very proactive conversations about huge housing growth with Dorset Council, for example, which was the main issue that the local plan failed upon at that stage. So I hope that answers your question, or your 2 questions.
Well, it leads into my second question, but I wanted to ask that one first, not least because in my time as a councillor, I've been through many local plan processes for Bournemouth, and I'm aware of what lies behind them. So I'm aware of how much work needs to go into this in a very, very restricted time frame. And so I think my second question, aligned to the first, is this time it will need to be different, so we don't end up with finding that we've got unexpected obstacles along the way. And I want a reassurance, as I'm sure everybody does, that this time it is thought through and researched with government and other agencies, that the path we have set out is going to be successful, that we don't get tripped up by something such as the cooperation part of that, or anything else for that matter, because we simply obviously cannot afford to suffer further delay. So that was the other side of that first question.
Okay, so I've got some good news on that. The new process introduces what are called gateways. There's 3 gateways. The first gateway will be this September, where we produce a self-assessment gateway to check we've done what we should be doing at that stage. Then the following 2 gateways, gateways 2 and gateways 3, are with the planning inspectorate, and we'll actually meet with the planning inspectorate and say, this is what we've got, this is what we think we do. And by involving the planning inspectorate earlier in the plan making process, we can ask those really tricky questions. The last time we did the local plan, we were sort of stuck with a decision that was made very early on, which was that the housing needs assessment was wrong, for example. It was fundamentally wrong due to the way the ONS had done the numbers. We didn't really get the opportunity to properly test that, and so the whole plan was hinging on the fact that the housing needs assessment was all the way wrong until we got to the examination. You get to examination, the inspectors look at it, planning inspectorate, and said, well, we disagree. that was way too late in the process to have that, and you can't resolve it at that stage. Equally, we couldn't resolve the duty to cooperate at that late stage as well. So what, number one, we should have been looking for a higher housing number all the way through that local plan, and number two, we should have been working with our neighbours Dorset Council to try and meet that higher housing number. So that was what ultimately that plan failed for. By bringing these gateways in that government are doing, they're helping councils to get plans done quicker and to get those decisions made earlier so that you don't make the same mistakes going forward. So we can get full plan coverage, because the way government sees it is the more plans in place, sooner the more homes get built and the greater certainty it provides to our communities. So I hope that is some reassurance that this time through we've got the necessary checks in place. Also, obviously making the use of ONS and making the use of the working group to help challenge us throughout will obviously help the process as well.
Thank you, Steve.
So my third question, Chair, out of the five, is about that part of the process. So Gateway 2 in particular, which is scheduled for April, May 2027. And so in terms of expecting the unexpected or otherwise, it could be argued that the political situation is fragile enough that there might be a change of direction by a council from May 27 onwards. And I think my question is focused on what are the contingency plans around a change of direction within here? Will it be too late? But if it isn't too late, what changes might be applied? And I think my primary concern is that for local residents and businesses and those involved in the development industry, where does that put us as an authority should that happen? Because it's a really pivotal time. And my concern, I think, is that if the delay ensuing from that is considerable, then we will not be in a good place going forward for development.
And that's a very interesting question. So Gateway 2, yes, it's timetabled for around about April, May next year. That if there is a change to leadership, there's two things I think that they need to assess. So we need to, talk to, if there is a change, the new leader, and what we need to say to them is, this is the timetable we've already agreed to, mandatorily agreed to a 30-month timetable. We need to produce the draft plan by September of 2027, which is 3 or 4 months down the road. So at this late stage, are you happy with that strategy? If so, that's okay. If not, if you could delay it, if you choose to delay it, this is the implication for the timetable. And also this is the implication in terms of the risk, because there is a risk if you don't follow the 30 months that the government can step in to take over the local plan making process. Obviously, this is untested water. We don't know what's going to happen, whether that will happen, whether, we don't even know yet what Gateway 2 looks like. We haven't got the guidance for Gateway 2. But all this will have to be, nearer the time, we'll have to try and work out and find our way through. With the last local plan, for example, we had to deal with the change to the local plan, to the leadership again. When we were writing our draft plan, what we did was we delayed the draft plan consultation on the final draft plan by 3 months. During that 3 months, we met with all the ward councillors and discussed all the ward issues and created what I mentioned earlier was that part 2 of the local plan, which really brought all the new councillors, because we had quite a few new councillors last time out, into the plan process and help them understand their local area. So we adapted there to try and change the plan making process in quite a small amount, quite a quick amount of time. I'll have to look at obviously what we can do within this 30-month timeline, because delays within that would have knock-on implications. I mean, I'm sure government aren't going to step in if a plan's delayed by 3 months, but if they're looking at a plan just sitting there and not moving, they probably are going to jump in and sort of say we need to get something done. So that would be a risk-based assessment at the time, I suggest.
So, Chair, that would be very high on my risk register personally, I think, and I think it should be at least getting proper consideration. So the fourth of my five is around consultation and external input to help the council in this process to be successful, and how that is going to be, if you like, selected, and how it's going to be undertaken, because otherwise the council, if it's there on its own, and it did seek input last time, from planning agents, development industry, those sort of trade bodies, if you like, really important because they're the people who will play a part in delivering whatever comes out at the other end. And I just wondered to what extent that is going to happen and when that engagement is likely to start, because I would suggest that we will gain far more from that part of the process the earlier the engagement actually is, provided it is with a broad consensus of people in the industry and those who are going to make positive input to it.
Thank you. That's another interesting question, actually. With the last local plan, the overview and scrutiny of the draft plan, we invited two, or overview and scrutiny invited two developers and agents along to try and provide that developer input into the draft plan. It was probably too late in the day, but you know, we've been having those conversations with, we do as the officers, having those conversations on a daily, weekly basis with the development industry. We've also got an agents and developers meeting set up every 3 months, whereby we can raise these issues. I mean, what we know at the moment, viability is a massive issue in the BCP area, and obviously any policy costs we look to through the local plan we look to add to a development is going to cause problems. Development has really slowed down because it's just too expensive to build. Number of different costs have been added on. I won't go into details of it now, but we're aware of that and we're talking with our developers and agents regularly about what we can do to try and improve things. But arguably, you know, at the moment, it doesn't matter if we took all the policy costs up, I don't think that we're going to get anything built. That's for our brownfield sites. Going into greenfield sites, it's a little bit easier. The policy costs are a lot less. But so we're having those conversations. Those are the things we definitely need to look at in great detail. There's potential for, you know, overview and scrutiny or the working group to invite the development industry in and to have those conversations as well and to probe them about those issues, or vice versa, for the you know, for the development industry to set out their current issues that they've got and how a local plan could help them or hinder them going forward, I'd suggest. Is that helpful in terms of an answer?
So it's helpful in as far as it goes, but we can prescribe whatever policies we like. If they're not delivered by the development industry, they will count for nothing as far as our housing targets, as an example, are concerned. And I think would say that therefore is very high on my risk register again, because that is the point of failure, is about delivery rather than whatever policy we decide to adopt in the end. Therefore, the viability issue, which is absolutely at the top of every developer's mind and is holding them back, and the more expensive money gets, the slower that will be, is something that the local authority needs to be working even closer together with the industry, with planning agents and so forth, than they have in the past. So, Chair, my final question, and it may be that Caroline Peach has got a long enough memory to recall issues such as structure plans, which go back a very long time. I certainly remember them, that's why I think she might. So if we look at the part of this report, which of course was only tabled this afternoon, so it hasn't been time to give it full consideration yet, but talking about what will be out of scope, and looking at neighbouring authority areas being out of scope. But at the same time, in the devolution presentation we had as councillors last Tuesday, we were hearing about the spatial development strategy, which I think, in speaking and asking a question at that meeting, are very similar to the old structure plans. I'm just wondering, out of devolution and the formation of Wessex with a regional mayor and so on, which may follow a couple of years down the track or later, whether there is any conflict in there in terms of what is out of scope, because I can see difficulty arising if we press ahead, but at the same time we take away issues and make decisions on those issues, which will have to be enacted by a future piece of regional government or an elected mayor in a devolved authority. And I'm not sure how well future-proofed this part of the paper is to address those potential problems. It may be too soon to ask the question, but I don't think it'll be too soon for very long.
Chair, if I just may make one comment, and then Wendy might want to sort of comment on some of the regional and Wessex work devolution. Just in terms of the in scope or out of scope, I think Steve you might correct me if I'm wrong. I think that is simply talking about the fact we can't like allocate land in another local authority. I think that's what that's saying. So it's out of scope for us to say as BCP administration that we will allocate land in Dorset just over the border. That's out of scope. But that's not to say we won't be having conversations, dialogue, talking about what is happening close to those boundaries and borders. It's a different and separate issue to the more regional planning conversation, which I know Wendy's been particularly close to. And Wendy, I don't know if you want to add anything sort of further in relation to this.
Go ahead, Wendy. Yeah.
Yeah, so the spatial development strategy, which will be produced at a Wessex level by Spatial Development Board, there are regulations that were set out in the Planning and Infrastructure Act 2025, which explicitly states what the contents of a spatial development strategy can have and what it can't have. And one of the things it mustn't have is specify particular areas where development should take place. So it is quite different to an old structure plan. There is some uncertainty over broad locations, and inherently it's an infrastructure driven document. So our expectation is the local plan is looking at growth and all the growth that kind of it needs to be delivering. Then there's the infrastructure kind of component coming in, which will be much more spatial. It will be almost map based, is again what we're being advised it should be. And then it's all those linkages into connectors and how it works to growth strategies, and those fundamental components that should come in at that level. Obviously, we are again waiting to see if the draft National Planning Policy Framework, which included even more detail than the regulations, obviously is what the document comes in, because obviously we've only had a consultation on that. But we at the moment are comfortable, I think, that there is that clear separation between what's being done at the local plan level and then what's being done at the Wessex level. I suppose the problem is if you get local plans that are saying they can't meet their full growth needs, and then obviously that's why the Strategic Planning Board will need to look at how growth then can be done at that higher level where there is mismatches or there is deliverability or phasing issues.
I think just to react to that, Chair, if I may, I think that's fundamentally the point that's driving what I'm saying. And if you like, on my risk register, it is there, and it's no good it coming in too late. Not least because that regional layer of government isn't in place and won't be in place for some time. And we don't know what the policy will be. We don't know what the likely strategy and timeline will be. But we do need to at least acknowledge that it will be change, whether it's one thing or another. And that uncertainty may not help at this stage, but it does need to be recognised. And I think that's a really critical point, that we don't end up tripping ourselves up in the process as well. Thank you, Chair. Those were my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we come now to Councillor Walters. Thank you everyone for your patience. There's a lot to cover in this. It's a big topic.
Thank you, Chair. Just bringing up further from what Councillor Beasley was saying there with the risks that might be coming in the future, the things that might change things. I think if we're planning on consulting with New Forest District Council about where we're going to allocate potential houses outside of it, we also need to plan to completely redo that again when Mid Hampshire Council is formed next door, because obviously there'll be politicians there from Test Valley and Wiltshire and the New Forest all in one place, so they may have different views and viewpoints about where those houses, if we do ask New Forest to take them on, should go. And the other thing I'd ask is that we do specific consultation with specifically affected groups. I think over the last year or so we've mentioned in the council chamber a few times we want to support the van lifers in our community, so consulting with them about sites that they might find relevant, consulting with social housing tenants about sites where they might feel like they could live, and the same with the gypsy and traveller community, because I think during the last local plan there was quite a lot of animosity around the sites that were chosen, and neighbours didn't want them there. But then you also found that the Gypsy and Traveller community didn't want that site either. So having some kind of agreement with them as to where they might want to live through early consultation would help with ensuring that social cohesion when it comes to those sites is going well. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve or anyone, did you want to respond to any of those points?
I'll just say on the first point about the cross-boundary changes, local government reorganisation, obviously we're attuned to that and we'll make sure that we do have the conversations with the appropriate authority when it forms. In terms of the consulting the residents, I think, there's some interesting points in there about, in terms of the Gypsy and Traveller site, let's start with that one. It's the last one. We only really had one site. We didn't want to consult with the community until we put the plans out there, and we consulted the Gypsy and Travellers at the same time, so everyone saw it at the same time. The Gypsy and Traveller community didn't necessarily not like the site. They were just informed. They were very worried about the residents' comments about that site, and that's still unresolved, and we haven't taken that forward. But I think through the new plan, we'll have the opportunity, I'm hoping, to have more sites to put into that conversation to see if it's the right area and the right site for all parties. I think with asking social housing tenants where they want to live is a good issue, because one of the problems we have is delivering affordable housing in our town centres due to the viability issues. And that's where we get highest density development, often delivered by the market, but the market can't afford, due to the viability issues of the high buildings and the cost that entails, to deliver actual affordable housing through cross subsidy in those areas. So what you tend to see, or is probably going to happen, is we'll see affordable housing towards the fringes of the urban area where it's harder to access facilities and services. So if that happens, what are the implications for those social tenants, and how do we change that? How do we make that better for them if they are located in the fringes? I'm thinking, for example, the most affordable housing we're building at the moment is in Bearwood and Merley, where 2 sites have been allocated for housing development. That's where we can deliver affordable housing because the land is cheaper. It's greenfield uplifting costs is huge. So there's a very minimal cost to start with in terms of land costs, so you can deliver 50% affordable housing. But obviously they're a long way away from the town centres and accessing facilities and services. So accessing people who probably, to start with, talking to people on those 2 sites would be a good bit of consultation to undertake to see how those communities that we're building there are working, what's missing, what could be done better. So I think that would be a very useful exercise to undertake. And also maybe the market houses there as well, to see if it meets the requirements of what they hoped were living in a new community on the edge of the urban area. And so, in terms of van life as well, what we can do there. So there's a number of different community groups that we'd like to talk to. It's how we can best do that in the time frame that we've got, and effectively, I think, that we need to discuss with the consultation team.
Thank you very much. Moving on, we have a few people still waiting to speak. I'm going to propose that I'm not going to take any more speakers. I've got 4 people who still want to speak, and so then and I think, unless anyone else need to tell me right now that they haven't indicated and they want to say something, okay,
I
then
may
we
want
will
to suggest some recommendations at the end.
So we'll come on to you, Councillor Goodall.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quickies, picking up on what Councillor Walters has just said. My question was, if you've got small groups that are not on the list, so to speak, how do they get in touch with you? And how do we advise them to get in touch with you if they have their van life or local community organisations that are small?
I think anyone like that, please let us know, or the consultation team, let them know, and we can start the process of trying to engage them. I mean, what we do when we try and set up a consultation, we try and meet as many people as possible. So any opportunities to meet smaller groups that don't get a chance to make a voice normally, we can do that. Potentially as well in the build up to whilst we're forming a strategy as well, depending upon capacity of officers to do that. But yeah, absolutely, we want to talk to as many people as possible. Please just put them in touch with the planning policy team or the consultation team, and we'll go from there. I found it was quite useful last time, for example, talking to the Gypsy and Traveller community. We hadn't had that conversation before, and being able to talk to them about their needs was really useful and really helpful to inform the last local plan. So anyone else that we can think of, I mean, we often talk to residents groups. We don't get too many businesses or business communities that want to talk to us, but that would be quite useful to see what we can do about. Is there anything we can do to help with the town centres, for example? So, I was mentioning the last councillor about the social housing tenants. I think that's a really good one to tap into as well in terms of seeing how we're meeting their needs. But there's a lot of people who are in need of housing, for example, sofa surfing or whatever across the urban area. We don't hear from them, and we'll hear from people who say they don't want housing next to them, which is understandable. Everyone doesn't like change. It's a hard thing to do. Managing change is very difficult. But we've got a lot of people who need that housing who don't have a voice, and it's how we get to hear from those people. So I think it's very important that we're put in touch with them, and we try and find them and talk to them and get them engaged in this process.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's fine. The other very swift question is on page 88. It says identifies settlements. Can you just clarify for me how these settlements are defined?
I'm waiting to see the government guidance on this, because traditionally, if you think of a rural area, you'll have a market town and you'll have a number of settlements, villages. Okay, and so what you do is you draw a settlement boundary around them, a black line drawn around the edge of the settlement. You say no development should happen outside of that black line. That keeps the development tightly constrained and stops the sprawl of development going out and beyond it. That's what traditionally happens. In the BCP area, we don't actually have a settlement boundary, because all the way around the BCP area we have the green belt, and the green belt defines what is urban and what is green belt, what is countryside and what is the urban area. So we don't actually have to define settlements. In the past we haven't had to, and we haven't had to define a settlement boundary. The new government regulations and guidance says define a settlement. So I want to know what that means equally, like you two, because are we then trying to split out the three towns? Are we trying to say Burton is separate, Merley is separate, and they're separate settlements? So I don't know at this stage how that will pan out, but it'll be interesting to see. So thank you for raising that one, because it is one of the questions I've got.
Right, yeah, thank you, Steve, very much. Going to go to Councillor Trent now, is next on my list.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have to admit, I'm actually still struggling with how on earth scoping will work, because we were told that basically any sort of new or different ideas, if it doesn't fit in with the government's vision or its identikit picture of what they want the local plan to look like, then it won't be acceptable anyway. So I'm sort of wondering how a scoping process will work with such restrictions on what can actually come out of it. But the questions I was going to ask is, how long do the town and parish councils have to prepare neighbourhood plans? And because presumably you can't just have a neighbourhood plan in one part. You've got to have neighbourhood plans in different parts of an area, and it'll be the town or parish council's responsibility for bringing that together. How long have they got to do that? And can communities jump the gun and actually start something themselves, even though they haven't got perhaps the formal structure that has been sort of used in the past? I think that's the main thing. The other one was just, again, it was a question mark about viability, because it seems crazy that something that's attractive to buyers on the outside of towns is more viable for social housing than the town centre, which is an area which you would have thought would have been more viable. But there's this sort of crazy thing about, are we actually in a position where we need to think through how on earth you can make town centre developments more viable? Because obviously, sort of that is the most convenient place for many people to end up living. So if those questions make sense, I should pose them.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Go ahead.
Okay, no problem. Make total sense. So, firstly, neighbourhood plans are voluntary. So a community group can, choose to do a neighbourhood plan. We don't have to force that upon anyone. That's for a community group to want to do that. So at the moment, we've got a number of neighbourhood plans that have been made, they've been finished, or are underway and in process. And some of those are in process are smaller ones within either the Bournemouth area or the Poole town area. Now, going forward, they can still, if they get the support of the town councils, they can continue to do them on a smaller area than the whole of the town council. If you were Poole Town Council and you just formed, or Bournemouth Town Council, and you wanted to do a neighbourhood plan, would you want to do one for the whole of Poole Town or the whole of Bournemouth Town? That's quite an undertaking for a voluntary group. There's no funding available at the moment from government to do neighbourhood plans. So it is a bit of an issue as to how you'd go about doing one. We used to do them as paid employees, paid officers. We used to do a Poole local plan. We did a Bournemouth local plan, and we've done a Christchurch local plan. We know how much work it takes to do an area of that extent. So it would be quite an undertaking for town council to try and do a neighbourhood plan for those two particular areas. Broadstone less so. I think that's quite a small geographical area, very easy to do. They've already got a neighbourhood plan. So I think those are for discussions. You don't have to do them. If you want to do them, you can, and you can do them in advance of the local plan. It does create problems doing it in advance of the local plan because it can easily be superseded. So a neighbourhood plan can only do non-strategic planning issues, and it can be, when we do our local plan, we'll deal with the strategic issues. So if if a neighbourhood plan, for example, says we're not going to have any growth here, no development here, and we come along a year later saying, well, actually, we need a lot of development in your area, I'm afraid, because strategically why that is what we need, because it's the most sustainable or whatever, that we would trump what was in the neighbourhood plan, and all that neighbourhood plan work would be wasted. So that is the one risk you do going ahead of the local plan process. It's best to follow the local plan, so you work together, community group with us, and we work on two plans so that our plan comes forward as a council's local plan, and a neighbourhood plan follows with the non-strategic details. So for example, we could say in this ward or in this area, we need to provide X number of homes and we need to do X number of jobs. The neighbourhood plan could come along and say, well, we want to help shape where those are in our area, and we will actually do the allocations of where that actually is within our neighbourhood area. So the two can work together, and that's about dialogue and having those conversations and seeing that we work with community groups. Last point was about viability. Yes, absolutely, it's crazy, isn't it? We should be having viability in town centres. But unfortunately, land prices in the town centre are very high. There's a lot of land trading, selling on to other developers. They keep buying off each other, and the price keeps going up and up and up. Greenfield land on the outside of the town is agricultural value. Times that by about 10 to get value what you'd sell it to a developer. It's starts at a lot lower level than what urban sites do. Then you throw in high rise in the urban areas. What does that mean? You've got now got the Building Safety Act following Grenfell, so there's a lot more costs associated with buildings safer. You've got the tax on the cladding tax that's being added to high-rise buildings and to developers in town centre. There's a number of costs that are added on that are just making it so unviable for developers to do high-rise. If you think about it, when you build a house, say you're a Wimpy and you build a house out in a greenbelt, you're just building a house, you can sell it pretty much within 6 months. If you're building a block of flats in a town centre, it's maybe a 2-year or 3-year development. You need a lot of investment, a lot of money to cover that 2 to 3 year period before you can start selling those flats and getting your money back. So there's whole risks and differentials which make the town centre and greenfield sites very different in terms of the development profile and the economics. Hopefully that answered your question. So
Thank you very much, Steve. That's great. Councillor Canavan, you next.
It was just a couple of quick questions, Chair, and then what I'd like to do, if I may, is to come on to talk about the recommendations.
Yes, I think some others, I have things in mind as well. Perhaps we'll deal with those at the end, if that's okay. If we could let everybody have, so I think other people, Councillor Aikenhead and myself also wanted to say some things. I haven't had a chance to speak yet.
Did Councillor Canavan mean he wanted to talk about the cabinet recommendation? I don't know. Or make recommendations.
I wanted to talk about these recommendations that are in this paper.
Okay. not making different recommendations.
Yes, making different recommendations.
Okay. Could we start with your comments and questions and come back to recommendations at the end then, please?
Okay. So I thought I heard Caroline mention the word consultants, which makes my hackles rise because they cost money. So I would like to understand what that means. But also in terms of the scoping exercise, with the greatest respect, what Mr. Dring has said sounded very loose. What I would like to see in that exercise is a very clear list of people who we are definitely going to go out and invite for their views. That would include councils, it would include community groups, it would include van life groups, it would include gypsy and travellers group. There should be a very clear list of people that we go out to ask their views on. I don't think it's quite good enough for them to wait to come to you, because that's not going to happen. And even if I sent you a list of people to consult, I've got no guarantee that you're going to put them on that list. So I would like to see something a bit firmer about who we're actually going to go out to, because that is going to be the first, well, as far as I can see anyway, that's going to be the first stage of this process in terms of going out to people and trying to engage them in what this is going to look like. So it feels like a good opportunity to involve those groups. So I'd like some reassurance on that. But my other points are related to the recommendations, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Cameron. Did anyone want to come back and respond on those points?
In terms of the consultants, we do need to use consultants to provide specific technical work. For example, we have to do a habitats regulations assessment. So we need to assess the impact of development upon all of the habitat regulations, all ecology and natural environment. We need specific people with that technical expertise to do that. We need people to do housing needs assessment, economic needs assessment, to provide all of that baseline information that we've got, and that's happening at the moment. So we've got all that information coming in, and there is a budget set out in the paper for all of that work. We've also got some money off government to help towards that in terms of, as we've tried to start plan making earlier, we've got an extra 100,000 in our budget to help with that. So that's the consultant side. In terms of the consultation, I think we've got a database. We've got a list of all the organisations. Happily share that with anyone who wants to suggest other people that aren't on there or anyone we've missed. It's based on that. We've collected that over the years. We've got a web page that says if you want to be involved in a local plan, please tell us. And we get people contact us all the time to be added to that list. And then also when we do a consultation, people respond to the consultation, then we add them to the list at that time as well. And we've been building it up, but we can share that, and if there's anyone missing, please let us know, but we want to go out as many people as possible.
Thank you very much. If I may come in at this point, I have a few things to raise as well. I'm going to start with the stakeholder engagement because it's been raised a few times just now by Councillor Canavan, but others as well. Just to echo really, I think what I've heard from others here is, and I share a view that from what we have in the papers, it feels as though there are some sort of aspects of the stakeholder community that are less clearly represented in the papers. Now, I heard what you just said, Steve, that may be just that we don't have an exhaustive list, and actually if we were to interrogate your exhaustive list, we'd see, oh yeah, they're all in there and it's fine. But my sense that I came away from reading this with was that it was quite often throughout the paper, sort of, there's a skew towards talking about agents and developers, talking about the industry side of things, and there was maybe a lack of a focus on the, I suppose, the people in need. So from my reflections, my kind of the things I pulled out about who I'd like to see on those lists were like the BCP Homelessness Partnership, Shelter, Citizens Advice, people who work with those who are in most dire need of this new housing or this additional, especially affordable housing that we must build. So I just wanted to make that point really, that, and I think possibly Councillor Canavan, possibly myself, are thinking about recommendations that might come out around that in terms of making sure that the board's view, I think quite a strong view from what I'm hearing, is that we're really focusing our engagement with stakeholders on that side of the equation as well. And I think it just to finish off on that point, you recalled the last time ONS engaged with the previous local plan and the people who were invited to attend. And again, I was very new councillor at that time, so I was just learning. But my reflection on that at the time was, gosh, this is just one side of things. This isn't all the stakeholders. This is a very specific subset of stakeholders. And I'd like to make sure that through this process that we're really giving that a more rounded approach, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. So the other bit that's kind of come out to me as a theme through what we've been hearing this evening is some of the uncertainties and shifting sands, perhaps, of the kind of the framework in which we're building this. So we've got, we've had quite a lot of discussion about the spatial development strategy that we don't have. We've got national policy, which isn't yet written. We've got a framework which isn't yet. So that my reflection on that is simply that this feels extremely challenging, and that there's a huge amount of uncertainty. So I think that's a real takeaway for me about how we navigate our way through this. It's going to be quite interesting to see how it all ends up fitting together in the end. One big question in my mind, because you've talked about how the national policies, the new approach, which is national policies and then local policies can't conflict with those or repeat them. I still don't really know what those national policies are going to cover in the whole. And I think you might tell me that you don't either. But at some point, I'd really like to have some clarity on that, because as a councillor, I want to know when I can usefully put something forward as a suggestion. And if I'm told, no, that's going to be covered by national policy, then I won't waste my time. But I don't know at the moment what I can and can't kind of say, well, what about this area? What about that area? And then I had a couple of specific questions. One of them was, there is some reference in the papers to the existing suite of planning policy documents that we have and how many there are and how some of them are very old. Are we able to retain anything? And the one I'm thinking of specifically is the parking SPD, which isn't very old. It was brought in 2021. So, and to my mind, that is much less out of date, if at all out of date, compared to others. And I would like to know that we don't have to throw out absolutely everything and start again, if possible. So it would be good to hear about that. Yeah, I think that's probably the main things I wanted to raise, actually.
Okay, if I work my way backwards, I'll start with that one.
Yeah.
Easy, because I turned my pad over and I'll turn it back the other way. So quite a few things in there. So in terms of past policies, so I think their starting point is going to be in the old local plans. We want to replace all of the policies of the old local plans because they're quite old. So those are actually in the Bournemouth local. We've got policies, for example, what we call SAVE policies from the 2001 Christchurch local plan. We've got, I think, early Bournemouth local plan from about the same time. I can't remember the date. We've got the Bournemouth Core Strategy 2008. We've got the East Dorset plan from 2016. So we've got a number of different old policies. We can replace all those with one plan, so it's easier for the public. They're all in this one plan. These are all the policies. Now, in terms of, that's the main policies, that's policy suite. In terms of the SPDs, such as the car parking SPD that you mentioned, the new planning process that we're working in does not have SPDs in it. So our existing SPDs are going to run out of date in 2030 anyway. They've been given a timeline. So the last SPD we can produce is by June this year, and we haven't got any in the pipeline. So there'll be no new SPDs, and we have to get rid of our old SPDs. What instead we do is we put those standards into our local plan. So the parking standards, for example, is a good example where you said what's in national policy, what's not. So national policy will say you can you must abide by this, you must do that, but you can set your own local parking standards. The local parking standards we've got, we can review those or just simply use them and put them in the local plan, and they'll have more weight as well because they'll be in a local plan rather than a supplementary planning document. So that's one of the benefits of the local plan process and removing SPDs. It's all to try and simplify policy making, so it's all in one place. I think that's what government wants to try and do. So you're not looking at a multiple set of documents all over the place. And what we're going to have is it's all going to be on a website. It's going to have a template. It's going to be easily navigatable so that you don't have to find PDFs and open documents. It will be, you know, just a website with links to various different bits through this template. So it will be easily found by AI, for example, and Google searches, that you can find the information you need, and it will be consistent across the country. So in the way it's set out. So that'll make it a lot easier to navigate. Now, in terms of what can be allowed and what can't be allowed. So in the scoping document we added in this appendix, we added a very simple 4-pager on what our scoping consultation would be. In the meantime, we've been working on a much more detailed version, which we've taken what is the current NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework. It sets out a consultation on development management policies, these national policies. They're at consultation. We don't get an answer on what the final ones will be until I think it's September's the earliest now, as to when we'll find out what that suite of development management policies is. And we'll be doing our consultation in June, July. So we'll work on the consultation ones at this stage, because that's all we can do. So, but what we've done is we've set out in a document, these are the policies, these are the national policies. This is what we can then do locally. So this is what's covered by national. This is what's covered by all the opportunities we have to scope. We have to do at a local level. So that's going to be much more detailed than the one you've got here. Now, through the recommendations, we have the delegated, or Millie's got delegated, the leader's got delegated authority to make a change. So we could have that discussion and make that document a bit more informative, because I think it would really help people to be clear on what is the national policy and what is below it, and therefore what scope there is. Unfortunately, it was too late to bring it forward to today's session, but and I don't know how we'd make that available for ONS to see as well. So I'll just throw out there that that's something we're working on. It would help with the consultation, I'm sure. Going back to your engagement, in terms of the list of engagement on page 80 in the report, the first of all is there's a lot of bodies there that are specific consultation bodies that government tells us we must consult. So that's why we've listed them there. Then it comes to community and the public, and you're very right. It basically says residents, community groups, parish and town councils, hard to reach groups, agents, developers. So there is a lot in there that we haven't specified, and maybe we could be a bit more specific in setting out all of those in that PID document, or the project initiation document, and that will give the reassurance. We publish this online, it'll give reassurance to people that those groups are in there. So I think we can take that away to do that. I think it's quite clear it's come out that this meeting we should do that, and as many as possible, and then getting people to say where we might be missing various groups.
Great. Well, thank you. And I think out of that, I'd probably quite like to form some sort of recommendation around that particular issue, which would be the recommendation from this board would be some further clarification of the stakeholders who will be engaged beyond the statutory and a sort of that general summary, and also something in there about maybe an encouragement to all councillors to provide any the names of organisations that they may know of, or groups in their own communities that they may be aware of that should be, if they're not already on that list, that should be added to the list. So that would be a recommendation I might want to put forward to the board to come out of tonight. Claire, was that remotely clear enough what I just said?
Maybe.
Sorry.
Do you want me to
yeah.
read something back to you? Yeah, so what I had from you was that further clarification be provided on the stakeholders to be engaged with beyond the statutory consultees, and that ward members be encouraged to provide details of any stakeholders they feel should be engaged with.
Yes, I think that covers it. So with that, I propose that as a recommendation from tonight's discussion. If anyone would second that recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Aikenhead. So is there a consensus on that? I haven't heard anyone be particularly anti. Councillor Beasley, you look like you might be not.
No, I'm
okay. That's fine.
listening
Sorry.
intently to you, Chair.
Okay, just
I'm concentrating.
Concentrating face. Fair enough. Okay, great, thank you. I think that's consensus for that as a recommendation. Thank you very much for that one. And I think Councillor Canavan and Councillor Aikenhead both maybe had other things to raise. So do you want to come back in, Councillor Canavan? Because I limited you.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's fine, Chair, thank you. One is, I'm wondering if we need to add a recommendation about this working group, because otherwise I think, I'm concerned it might get lost. So if we are going to include it as per the supplement which came round, I'm content with that, but I don't think it should include the references to not having substitutes or on the issue about confidentiality, mainly because I just see that as completely unrealistic, because, councils will find a way around it, I can assure you of that. So I'm happy with the paper, but just take those out. And then to include some reference to, establishing the working group as per those numbers, I think is fine and necessary, and would help kind of lock it in. So that was that point. The other point, Chair, and Councillor Walters will have to forgive me for this, but I have no confidence at all in town councils being able to deal with the neighbourhood plan issue, none at all. So the idea that they're going to fill the gap is cloud cuckoo land as far as I'm concerned. So we're not going to be able, in my view, to wait for these new town councils to create neighbourhood plans, either for the whole of the towns or for parts of the towns even. I just do not think that's going to be doable. So what that says to me is that we have to do it. And therefore I'm attracted to the point that Mr. Tring made about a supplementary plan. So I'd like to understand a bit more about how that might work, because I think if we could have a supplementary plan which would be able to encompass more detailed information, more detailed plans for much more local areas, that would be incredibly attractive to me to try and do that ourselves, rather than relying on these new creations to do it for us. So forgive me, Councillor Walters.
Okay, I wonder if officers would like to come back in on that point about the neighbourhood planning side of things. Yes, go ahead, Wendy.
So I suppose it's worth being clear that only a parish or town council has the legal right to lead and prepare a neighbourhood plan. And so that's the position that we're in now. So we have full coverage. So those plans that are in existence are taken forward, irrespective of whether or not the neighbourhood forum is now dissolved or the equivalent of dissolved. Their plan still has that right, but the only ones that can take that forward is them. So but you can have sub areas within town council boundaries, but again, it has to be the town council that comes through to BCP council to ask for it to be designated, i.e. for that component to be defined. Okay. If what we're talking about, which I think is, and again, I'm not sure, I think maybe Steve slightly confused things with supplementary plans. We've just talked about, actually, we don't have the ability to do supplementary planning documents in the old sense. I think what I'm taking is there is concern around a local plan being too strategic and leaving a community deficit. So I think from what I'm taking is you're asking us to be very clear as we're going forward how that kind of more neighbourhood level plan area consideration is being taken into account. And that makes sense to me with you saying to us, are you also talking to all the peoples and the groups and the forums that you need to? Because by their very nature, a number of those will have particular focuses which are more than a town council level. The other thing I think we need to be aware of is, so I think I'm thinking again about your concern around talking to organisations such as kind of Shelter and others, is that possibly we could have been a little bit clearer that when we are moving to that next stage, not the scoping stage, but the vision stage, that vision is a wider corporate priority vision, values, objectives. And obviously we've got the housing strategy. We've got all that amazing work that those other bits of the council are doing. And to some extent, a key component that planning does is pull those other strategies and evidence and things together. And hopefully there is a clear steer on how it moves forward in a plan context. The issue that we're going to have a little bit is most of those studies are based on demography. And the housing number that we have to plan for is based on an affordability quotient and the number of dwellings that are in the area. So we know there is a mismatch because the fundamental bases are different, but that isn't a reason why we can't be upfront with members as we move through the process about how we kind of mash those two fundamentally different principles. But as I say, I think it's really helpful that you are giving us this clarity around, for me, the concerns that almost like it's going to be too strategic. It's not really going to give you enough of that bottom level.
Councillor Cannon, has that clarified a bit in terms of the, you know?
And you're just saying you can't do it. So.
I think so. We don't have that power anymore, so yeah. There was forgive me. There was a recommendation around the working group, and I think Councillor Aikenhead, you said you might have some words. So shall we hear Councillor Aikenhead's words around that?
I was going to suggest exactly the same thing. I was going to suggest that we recommend that on the working group substitution should be allowed, and that working group members are permitted to share confidential information with other councillors as long as they take responsibility for ensuring it's not made public.
So, Councillor Waite?
I'd like to propose an amendment to that, just bearing in mind what Caroline said earlier about getting people up to speed, and it was simply to suggest that substitutes must be notified 72 hours in advance and must attend a briefing with either the chair or a lead officer. That would seem to be to reasonably cover what it is you both want.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, add that
we've got
to it. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a recommendation amalgamating those Councillor Waite's point into Councillor Aikenhead's. Is everyone clear on what's been put forward? We got a seconder. No. Councillor Beasley. Great. So I'm not noticing any sign of dissension. Do we have consensus for that as a recommendation from the board on the working group? Yeah. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. And I think that probably brings us to the end. Unless I've missed.
There's one. I had one more thing I was going to suggest. It's really just a small point, but I thought that after listening to other things people brought up, that maybe we should recommend that a risk is added to the risk register concerning the uncertainty around devolution, as that was brought up, and it's not actually in the risk register. So we could recommend that a risk is added. It's quite a small thing, but I think it's good for us to put those sort of recommendations in.
Councillor Walters.
Devolution and local government reorganisation is probably worthwhile adding in there as well with Hampshire.
Okay. Yeah. Officers, any concerns or response to that before we go forward? Yeah, Lindy.
Just asking clarity. Are you talking about the council's risk register, or are you talking about service?
I think it's the one that's in the PID.
The one that's in the PID.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that R4 is about resource and alignment. So this is in the risk registers. R4 is resource and alignment with emerging spatial development strategy. At the moment, we've got mitigation is member and officer engagement, positive project management of the strategic development, spatial development strategy and local plan. So that is trying to cover the fact that there's a potential alignment issue between the two. So I think that's what you're referring to, and Councillor Beasley was referring to earlier, but we can expand on that if.
Go just put it in the same one, maybe.
So perhaps, yeah. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say if you could explain what additional to that or is it Councillor Beasley or Councillor Aikenhead wanted to add, that'd be useful to understand. Was it about the alignment of the two plans? Because obviously two plans are going to be produced, our plan and the SDS are going to be produced at the same time, and at some point they might not align, and what we're obviously trying to do that as best as we can, but it's how we do that is a risk and could cause problems.
My point wasn't specifically about alignment of plans. It was about the fact that the changes that are happening in devolution might cause problem. It might cause wider problems than that. So any kind of change is a risk. So there might be changes in who you need to consult with. There may be changes to the other things that are not necessarily just this one strategy. So I just felt that the risk that we're suggesting is a little bit wider than the one that you've got written in here.
Okay, so, and did you get some wording for that, Claire, or did we need to?
Yes, so.
Shall we hear that? And then so we're all clear.
So the recommendation is that a risk concerning devolution and local government reorganisation be included within the risk register as outlined in the PID.
Yeah, okay. And Councillor Beasley?
So, Chair, I did mention the uncertainty of the outcome of next year's BCP council elections. I don't do it for any reason other than to say that I think it is a significant risk. And I'm sure every member of this authority would agree with me as to how that could derail. If we just ignore the risk, then we're not doing good service, I think. But a wider point, I think, Chair, was that a number of things I raised were causing me concern as being risks around issues here. And I was just wondering, in terms of democratic services, how detailed the notes of this meeting are likely to be, and or the minutes of this meeting, because a lot of valid points have been raised by members which will easily get forgotten once this goes to Cabinet and onwards, and I'm sure the officers will not have forgotten them, but I think for proper governance that it needs to have some sort of record, because this is going to be a very complex process. It is going to have much wider and longer term implications than many of the things we do as a council. And I'd like to feel that this board has had significant positive input into it, and that those issues don't then get either forgotten or ignored.
Yeah, I'm completely with you there. And I think if there's any specific additional things that you would like to make sure really do have as much impact as they can from what's come out of this, they should be put forward as recommendations. The risk that you just mentioned about a change in political leadership is in the risk register already, as are, I think, one or two of the others that you mentioned. But I think the one that Councillor Aikenhead has brought up is probably one that is worth us putting forward. But if there's other bits of the discussion that we've had tonight that you feel we haven't captured in any recommendations, please do say, because I agree, I want to make sure we're as effective as we can be. Okay, so I think we've got that recommendation. Did we have a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Walters, thank you. And again, do we have consensus for that recommendation around the risk around the devolution and LGR? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Have I missed anybody else? No, good. In which case, thank you very much, Councillor Moore. Thank you very much, Steve, Caroline and Wendy, all of you, for a really useful discussion and lots of really important information. So thank you very much for your time. Okay, and I think we will take a 5-minute comfort break at this point, because we are 2 hours in, so 5 minutes and we'll be back at 10 past, please. Thank you. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to our Overview and Scrutiny Board meeting. We are moving on now to item 10 on the agenda, which is the social value statement for BCP Council. So we have, again, Councillor Sandra Moore is here to introduce, and we also have, who is the Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Communities and Partnerships. And we also have Stuart Bickle, who is the Head of Procurement and Contracts Management, who will be presenting the report. So if I can hand over, online we also have Kat McMillan, who I think will be contributing as well. So Kat is the Head of Communities, Partnerships and Community Safety. If I can hand over first of all to Councillor Moore, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, can I start by offering Councillor Jeff Hanna's apologies for not being able to attend this evening, but Jeff will, of course, be presenting the paper at Cabinet, and I will be seconding. So if I can just go into the report. This report brings forward BCP Council's first social value statement, a key step in establishing a consistent organisation-wide approach to how we generate wider benefits for our residents, communities and local economy. The statement responds to the Social Value Act and the emerging expectations under the Procurement Act of 2023 by setting out how the Council will maximise public benefit through its commissioning, planning, partnerships and day-to-day operations. It's been developed through cross-council collaboration and is aligned to our corporate strategy priorities, ensuring that social value is not an add-on, but is embedded in how we deliver services and spend public money. The statement also introduces a clear and practical framework for delivery, including the adoption of nationally recognised measures and a requirement to embed social value within procurement and contract management activity. And the aim is to support transparency, enable comparison with other authorities, and encourage innovation from suppliers, while at the same time ensuring value for money by securing additional benefits at no extra cost. So overall, this represents an important foundation for strengthening outcomes for our communities, supporting inclusive growth, environmental sustainability, and improved well-being. It should also reduce the risk of inconsistency, missed opportunities, and unclear expectations across the Council. So, in conclusion, Councillor Hannah and I would like to express our thanks to Stuart Bickle, our Director of Procurement, and Kat McMillan, our Head of Communities, Partnership and Community Safety, for this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moore. And now I'll hand over, if I may, to Stuart, yes, to present the paper and a little bit more detail for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. I should say to start with that I'm Head of Procurement and Contract Management, not Director.
I promoted you.
Yeah, well, you should be the Director.
And also just obviously grateful that Kat's online as well. Kat's been a big player in helping to move this forward over the last year. So thank you, Kat. What I want to do to start off is just to explain. Councillor Moore just said that this is BCP's first social value statement. And I'd like to explain why it's the first one, given the Social Value Act is dated 2012, which is also addressing your question from a few days ago. So the Social Value Act was introduced, as I say, 2012, became law in 2013. What that introduced was a soft baseline obligation. It wasn't hard by any stretch of the imagination. There was no hard commitment to do anything. So what it asked us to do was to have regard to delivering social benefit. And that social benefit was unpacked as economic, social and environmental. It only applied to services above threshold, and it only applied at the pre-procurement stage. So there was nothing in terms of T's and C's or KPIs and contract management after contract award. And it didn't prescribe anything in terms of how to measure, weight or monitor social value delivery. And no surprise that implementation of what the Social Value Act gave us, all public sector, the opportunity to try to deliver was all over the place, really, with public sector, and everyone going off down their own road, really trying to make sense of it, trying to come up with bespoke models for how it would work within their geographical footprint. So no consistency after 2012. We then get to 2015 when the public contract regulations were introduced, and that it started to harden things up, but as I'll explain, not terribly well. So what PCR 15 did do was it gave contracting the authorities the opportunity to start to use social value as one of the award criteria during evaluation. It had to be linked to subject matter of the contract though, so you couldn't use social value criteria that weren't directly linked to the subject matter of what you were buying. So social value did start to become a competitive differentiator, that it was a way that bidders could position themselves better than other bidders, but it remained optional and it was inconsistently applied across both central government and local authorities. We then got procurement policy note in 2020 that developed a social value model, and that's hardened things up considerably, particularly for, well, specifically for central government. For central government, it then became mandatory that 10% of the award criteria need to be weighted for social value benefits. So consistency across central government, local authorities still having embarked on a journey of trying to develop their own things in 2012, some were still quite wedded to going off down the particular routes that they'd forged. So it was still inconsistent. We then get to Procurement Act 23 that came into force February last year, and for the first time there, we've now got something that is it's mandatory, it's statutory, and that's why this is coming to you now. So Procurement Act, it does require that we, as an authority, maximise public benefit, and yeah, as I say, it's no longer optional. So that's really summarises how we've got to where we are. It's taken us, in terms of developing a statement as an authority, it's taken a year to get here. I'm really, I'm not entirely sure how you want me to present this. I'm very happy just to take questions.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine by me. I am sure that everybody has read the paper, and therefore we'll have questions and comments for you. So if I may open it up to all of the board for any questions or comments. Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the paper. The paper sets out a series of options, and option 2 is the one that is being recommended. But it says this would be the first phase of the council's approach towards social value, with a second phase proposed to look at social value and corporate responsibility outside of procurement and contract management. But it doesn't say when you're going to do that. So I would like to know, when are you going to do that? The other issue for me was, when I was reading through this, I thought, well, where's the action plan? And then it occurred to me that the only action plan really is this set of requirements on people undertaking the tender process to tick these various boxes about which bits of the social responsibility they are endeavouring to meet. But I would like to know if there's anything else beyond that. And also the document itself, the draft statement itself, talks about this procurement process applying to contracts above £30,000, I think, is my understanding from the paper. But there is only a requirement within that for the person doing the tendering to meet a 10% threshold of those requirements, and that seems incredibly low to me. So I was wondering about why that is at that level, and whether it could be increased, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, so if I deal with the second part of your question first, that's the easy part really. So the £30,000 threshold. So our finance regs, they set out that above 30,000 will apply it where it's relevant and proportionate. So it's not mandatory above 30, it's mandatory for us to reflect on whether it's relevant and proportionate. If it is, then we would do it. In all likelihood, it's not something that we would do on the vast majority of procurements between 30,000 and where we get to the regulatory threshold. So it becomes a legal requirement when we get to above threshold. Below that legal requirement, then we need to apply some judgment around whether it's proportionate to do it.
So what about 10%?
So we're not obliged to have 10% dedicated to social value when it's below threshold, and so with the, if we take services for example, so if we're buying services that are forecast to cost anything between 30,000 and the threshold currently sits around 225,000, if it's in that bracket, we're not obliged to factor social value into it. So it becomes about judgment. No, we can. If it's proportionate and relevant, then we would.
Okay.
So it makes that decision still.
Okay. So that would be the procurement working in consultation with the client team that are actually running the ones that would own the contract and manage it.
Okay. So could you give the answer to the other part of the question?
Yeah, the other part, I'm wondering, Kat, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Stu. Yes, thank you very much. So in relation to the whole piece of work around social value outside of procurement, this relates to a number of items that have been raised through sessions we've done with CMB and Cabinet about thinking about, okay, well, what is our take on, for example, those offers that we get from companies who are looking to undertake corporate social responsibility. So we get a number of organisations that come to us as a council and offer us time, volunteers. You know, they want to do a session or an away day or give something back to their community. Sometimes they want to give us grants and they want to know what community group should that be sent through to, or just generally what are our priorities as BCP Council in relation to how we would like to disperse, perhaps better word, those corporate offers. So we can obviously refer them to the corporate strategy, but our plan is that once this is agreed, the social value statement, over the next 12 months, we'll be working on trying to identify what are our key priorities that we would want to channel those offers of help, of goods, of potentially grants. Where would we want those to go? So, for example, would we want to prioritise corporate parenting? You know, our care experienced young leavers who are going out into the world and thinking about what they want to do and what they need in terms of support, or are there specific items that we want to draw up a wish list of that we can then channel people to? And at the moment we don't have that. So we have an internal working group that has helped to shape the current social value statement, but we recognise as well that there is the next step, which is outside of that procurement element. How else can we help to funnel those really good opportunities that come through to us and make best use of them, rather than perhaps myself or another colleague or someone saying, oh, this is a really good group. Let's have a really clearly defined list that we want to prioritise going forward. So in terms of what does stage 2 look like, I would say it is another 12 months. This took 12 months to get the original social value statement set up. That's probably meeting every 6 to 8 weeks around diary commitments. We've got really good broad representation across communities, environments, parks, adult social care, children's social care, policy and performance. Have I missed anyone off, Stu, that you can think of? it's a really broad representation, and the idea is that we will continue that program of options and looking at things like best practice. So, for example, the Parks Foundation, which obviously Environment work really closely with, on their webpage, they have a section which says these are the things that we need to help improve our public open spaces over the next 3 to 5 years. We need, off the top of my head, for an example, we need £500 for a pond liner so that we can improve this bit of a public open space and be able to feed into improving our environments and making them better. So thinking again about what are those options and opportunities that we might have around that wish list, essentially, as BCP Council, that we could then develop through that working group and bring forward to, obviously, to overview and scrutiny, I would assume, and to cabinet and to council to get sign up on the these. We agree that these are our corporate priorities that we want to support going forward.
Thank you, Kat.
Chair.
I think Councillor Canavan, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me because I'm struggling with this, because the concept of social value in my head doesn't stop at procurement, and it doesn't stop at people wanting to do voluntary work for you. Social value extends to planning, licensing, housing, everything the council does that has an element of social value in it. What I can't see in here is how you're going to apply this to those areas. I can't see it, which is why I was looking for some kind of action plan which would demonstrate to me that actually it's not just about procurement, it's about everything the council does that has an element of social value in it, and how you are going to apply this policy to those areas. I'm just struggling with that.
Kat, did you want to come back? Or
Happy to come back in their chair, if that's okay. So yes, I did miss off planning policy, housing, etc. are also included in that working group. And Stu might want to elaborate on this point, but our initial step was to get the foundations right, and then to branch out into those other options, looking at how else can all of those other service areas contribute towards social value in terms of what they do through planning policy, as you say, various other aspects. But the remit that we were given by CMB and Cabot originally was to develop the social value statement for procurement first, and then to branch out into the other elements. But if it would help Councillor Canavan, we can bring together an action plan that sets out the other items that we have been looking at but have been pushed back to phase 2, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Yep. Yes, Stuart.
So phase 1 was very much about getting everyone within the authority on the same page in terms of what does social value actually mean. There's been, in the same way that I said that many different authorities had interpreted things differently and developed their own approach, we've also seen that within BCP over the years, and different departments going down their own route, having different interpretation. There's been a lot of bringing people together to get that common understanding. So phase 1 was very much about just getting people on the same page, about also formally saying, yes, procurement will do this. So in terms of an action plan, then it's that procurement includes this approach to social value in procurement going forward. The other piece that was bedded into this right at the start, and Kat, you might want to come back on this one, is how it helps us with community asset transfers by valuing social value aspects of that's not monetised in the usual way. And just to pick up on a couple of other bits in terms of phase 2 and where we want to take it. So Kat's already spoken about the group that we've got, the social value working group. Representation from IT in Andrew Cox, who works for Sarah Chamberlain, director. Sarah is very keen that we're able to report our corporate performance on social value, so that and this is it ties together with why we need to use national TOM. So we are using a national model so that we can directly compare our performance against other contracting organisations that use the same model. And and there's, in terms of the shopping list piece that Kat spoke about, there's a terrific example on Bristol City Council's webpage where they've done exactly that, and it's all under the guise of social value, accepting that it's different from what we do in procurement, but it's about not missing the opportunity to engage with suppliers that they've got a corporate social responsibility budget, and they want to spend it in our area, and it's about us enabling them and harnessing that spend so that we get value from it. Kat, did you want to come back on the community asset transfers?
Absolutely, thank you. So obviously there's a real drive wherever we can to enable community asset transfers, CAT transfers across Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, because often communities are best placed to run those facilities, to deliver those facilities. They know what matters most in relation to their communities, but also they can probably do it far more cost effectively when you think about rates and costs and overheads. So it's something that we're really keen on doing, but equally we have to be really clear about if we're enabling or pushing forward with a CAT transfer, about how we're monetizing that. So how can we say that actually this is best disposal under the financial regulations for the council, but also for national government in relation to disposal of that asset to a community group in order for them to take it forward. And so particular thinking for stage 2 is looking at how do we monetize that social value. So if you have a community group that are operating a community centre, for example, or a youth centre, for example, how can we monetize the benefits that they bring to that community in terms of number of volunteers that they have, the upstream targeted intervention that they'll be doing, you know, around things like reducing loneliness and isolation, and really being able to say, actually, the building may be worth, I don't know, say 300,000. I'm just, you know, giving a number off the top of my head. But in terms of the value of what that community group does, in terms of preventing additional costs that may come further down the line to the council through their targeted activities around perhaps its youth activities, or it's enabling a wide range of community classes to take place. Can we monetize that so that if someone comes back to us and say, why did you hand that building over to that community group? You know, you could have sold it, you could have developed it, you could have done an X, Y, and Z. This is the reason why, because actually it's in the best interest of that community for this community group to run it, because we've done the maths, we've done the calculations, we've worked with that community group to understand what it is that they give back to their communities, and we feel that that is the best interest to enable our communities to flourish and empower them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chair. So I've listened carefully to what the officers have been saying, and it may well be that my questions or concerns are best answered probably by Mr. Bickle. I see here in the report that there are no financial implications, both in terms of capital and revenue. And I'm trying to square in my own mind how this will work in practice with that remaining intact in the longer term. So looking at the 4 options, the favourable option that's recommended is option 2. And I don't know, but it looks to me very much as though that one engages with all measures and therefore is the widest of scope. That may or may not be the case, but I think that's my reading of it. But it also occurs to me that in doing that, rather than incrementally over time by adopting one of the other ones, that we are in danger perhaps of creating a little bit of an industry within the council that didn't exist before, putting aside the statutory responsibilities for a moment. And at a time of severe austerity within this council around frontline services that are not statutory, it bothers me that we will find the time and the people to actually monitor this. at the expense of things that we would normally take for granted would be happening within the council. And so I warm to the theme that Councillor Canavan has suggested around the action plan, and I would couple the action plan together with governance. Who is overseeing the governance of this? Is it self-regulating within the officers who we've heard from tonight, or is it wider than that, or perhaps is it independent of that? And where is the member engagement in challenging that and the outcomes of it? And I don't see that at the moment. So is this actually going to deliver practical benefits, not just to the authority around procurement, but practical benefits to the residents and communities that we serve? I think the other point which Cat Macmillan was making a moment ago around monetising various activities out there, well, that's all well and good, but I think that looks to me a little bit of drift actually to widen this at a time when it might be quite desirable. We have managed to get along somehow without it before by widening it that far, and perhaps there are other things that we should be spending that resource on. And I then come back to my first point, which is that the report tells us there are no financial implications either in terms of capital or revenue. I can't square that circle in my own mind, and perhaps the officers could help.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, are you happy to
Yep.
start with that one? Thank you.
So in terms of financial implications, I'd say that that is true for phase one, but where option two talks about second phase to develop other aspects, then there could well be financial implications in that. And that's why we're not seeking approval of that right now. And that would need to go back for discussion to CMB, no doubt, back to yourselves, back to cabinet, depending on what that actually looks like. But we're not undertaking to do anything that would have a cost implication right now. And so that means that it does get us to a compliant state, and we are talking about compliance with the Procurement Act, which is obviously statutory requirement. In terms of kind of like who would actually do the monitoring piece, so one of the regulations in the Act is that in terms of KPIs, that where a contract value is above 5 million, we have to report the performance against contractual KPIs within the public domain on an annual basis. And so we've do now, as an authority, we've worked out how to engage with our community of contract managers across the organisation, of which we're currently counting about 290. Those people will need to report to the central team about performance against KPIs. And in terms of the 116 metrics, you're not measuring every one of them. We're not measuring, it's not 116 KPIs. There's been one KPI about social value, which is the monetised sum that they've committed to actually deliver. And then the contract manager is monitoring the actual delivery against that single monetised sum. So that would be one KPI out of the suite of contractual KPIs. And us within the central team capturing that information means that we're able to feed that into IT really at no extra cost in procurement, because we're currently working with IT on developing a procurement app, which will bring forward a lot of efficiency with data handling in procurement, so and with reporting as well to capture that. Practical benefits, then just drawing out, I've scribbled a few on a piece of paper next to me actually. So there are three that I made a note of earlier, just in terms of long-term unemployed being recruited, and those that's three of more than three that I actually made a note of, but different categories of unemployed, so long-term unemployed and homeless being recruited, and long-term unemployed armed forces veterans, each of those gets monetised at slightly over 51,000 a year. So it's counting that kind of thing, which is clearly it's a direct practical benefit to BCP if we're leveraging suppliers to consider that kind of thing in their recruitment behaviour.
Thank you. Is that are you happy? Did you want to come back in, Councillor Beasley?
I hear what we've been told, and obviously we're not the professionals in this, so we have to, a certain extent, accept what we're told. I think we as councillors need to keep a very close watch on this for the reasons that I've already identified, and I hope we will. I certainly will. And I think we need to make sure that what comes in the future is true to the aims that have been set out tonight. And it is very easy with these things for them to have substantial amounts of mission creep over time, and therefore costs which we don't currently incur over time. So I think that CMT will be mindful of the financial implications, and I'm sure our financial officers will be too, because that has got to be brought into check. So if there's any ambition around that occurring, that will be very strongly resisted, not just by people like me, but I suspect by finance as well, for very good reason, because it is about prioritising the finances of the council. It is about prioritising the services that the council provides. And whilst they may be very worthy aims and outputs, which nobody is going to argue with, it is very easy then for those to become business as usual, whatever the cost. And in terms of monetising these, and this relates to the governance issue, we heard some figures a moment ago. I don't know where those figures come from, and I don't know on what basis they are made, but the governance really needs to get underneath that to ensure that they are of proper provenance, and if they are, that they're adhered to uniformly across the council. I think I've made my point, judging by the nods I'm getting from Cat Macmillan. I think that is understood, but I think equally it is our job as Overview and Scrutiny Board to be raising those, rather than just waving the whole thing through, and waving the whole thing through at Cabinet without asking ourselves these really challenging questions for the longer term.
Thank you. Yes. I think Stuart would like to come back in, and then I have seen your hand as well, Councillor Canavan. Yeah.
So just quite briefly from me. So the figures, they are part of a national model that is given to us by the LGA, and that model was developed between central government and the LGA. So that's where those figures come from. In terms of mission creep, I totally agree. And it's one of the things that me and Kat have already been quite firm on with the group, is that where we've got no mandate to do something, we're just being very clear, no, that's not happening. We've got no mandate to do that. So everything that we've done has been about phase one, getting everyone on the same page for what we did have a mandate to do. And we get that delivered, we get procurement working in the way that we should be, and then anything else that comes forward as phase two, then that is all subject to approval. And so the only cost implication at the moment is the dozen or so officers that would meet on that working group, which is once a quarter, I think, Kat. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Aikenhead.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that thank you for bringing this forward, because I think it's a really, really important piece of work. I do take the point that you mustn't have mission creep, and if there's no money allocated, you can't spend any money. But I would like to say I think that actually some money does need to be spent on this. So when we come to do phase two, rather than mission creep, we need an actual I agree with the idea that we need a plan to say, what are we going to do with this? Because in the end, this is about how we spend. I mean, the bit about procurement is about how we spend the finances of the council, and whether we spend that money just getting the cheapest services we can, or whether we spend it in a way that makes sure that we are benefiting the local community. And when we take that on to the phase 2, it's looking at everything else that we do in the council, and basically social value is how much we're benefiting the community. So it's going to benefit the residents. Otherwise, that's by definition, that's what it is. So I very much support the idea of having some sort of an action plan for how this is going to be taken forward beyond procurement. But I do actually have a question. It's kind of a little bit of detail. I've noticed all these numbers that you've got for monetarizing the value of the different things. And I noticed that some of them are 0. And so I just wanted to ask how you will actually include the 0 rated things, and how they count, and just a little bit of an explanation of how it works.
Go ahead.
So absolutely anticipated that question, fortunately. They are what is known as non-monetized indicators. So the principle is that we would only monetize something that's quantifiable. Otherwise, there's a phrase that's been used many times across the organisation over the last few years is greenwashing. And if suppliers can say, well, we'll have a policy in place to do this, we'll do that, and we give them the monetized value, then it's just a very quick way of grabbing some money. So yeah, they're baseline indicators.
Okay. So does that mean that when you're considering whether to use that supplier rather than a different one, you will look at how many indicators they've ticked, as well as looking at the monetized value?
No, it wouldn't actually come into the evaluation piece. So we'd see it. So if they change their performance over the life of the contract, then we'd be able to monitor that and report on it if we wanted to. But no, there wouldn't be, because there would be no financial value set against it. Then it would be 0 sum in terms of contribution to the evaluation.
But does that mean they don't need to do these things and they don't matter?
It means that we're capturing whether or not they are doing them. It's clearly indicators of best practice, and we would like to know whether or not our supply chain are doing that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I get that this is the first step, along the path, but I agree with the points that Councillor Aiken had in terms of an action plan, in terms of how we take this forward beyond procurement. What's bothering me is this whole concept of trying to monetize the value that our community brings. I mean, we're sitting in a situation at the moment where Charminster Library is closed because the BCP Council can't find £600,000 to do the necessary work to reopen it. But the loss of social value is huge because people can't go to the library. People got nowhere to socialise. The loss of that is massive. Yeah, we're not even factoring that in. We're just saying, oh, we can't afford 600,000 quid. Therefore, the library is closed indefinitely. That's wholly wrong. So if we're serious about social value, then we have to find a way of somehow factoring that into the decisions that we take. I'm very uncomfortable about monetarising it, but if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. But, we have to do it quickly. I don't really want to wait another year, frankly, to be able to do that. So we can find some financial justification to reopen Charminster Library. That's bonkers, in my view. Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Canavan. Just going to put a light pin in discussion of Charminster Library because we are going to come on to that under our work plan items. So otherwise we will get sidetracked to talking about that, which we do need to talk about. But Stuart or Kat, did you want to respond to that comment?
Just briefly again. So one of the principles of social value delivery, social value benefits, is that we don't pay for them. That if so, for example, if we're awarding a contract to deliver services that's going to cost us £300,000, and the successful bidders made commitments to deliver social value benefits of another 20,000, we don't end up paying £320,000. That is just a fundamental principle of social value, is that we only pay for what the contract's worth. It then becomes a competitive differentiator about what else are they going to give us that's added value. Now, when I said in my introduction that some councils have gone down a different road because they've had an awfully long time to think about this without any central government steer. Some councils are actually saying, so we've got a library that's closing. We want all of our bidders to say, well, we're going to pitch this much money into a kitty that you can keep your library open. But you're paying extra for it, and it's completely counter to the principles of social value. And again, immediately you can't compare BCP's performance against other councils because you're not following a national model. It is something that we could do, but you're going to pay more money for it. And again, I'd strongly recommend against that as an approach. But that just to bear in mind that the approach is that we don't pay extra, and we're following a national model. That's all I really wanted to add.
Thank you. And Kat, did you want to come in as well?
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just very mindful the scope of the report is very much about that phase one, but I would like to respond to Councillor Canavan's question, if that's okay. So coming from a non-statutory service, as Councillor Moore knows, where every year, we're up against the cuts, communities, everyone loves communities, but they're not statutory, the funding, we have to make cuts somewhere. When you think about things like libraries, we do need to be able to make those cases for actually what is the social value return on having a library? How can we demonstrate that? So that actually, if we're going to our funding providers, if we're going to the National Lottery, to Historic England, or whoever might be the appropriate individual, we can say that we've got 15 volunteers that give X number of hours, and that equates to this amount. We've got X number of people who use the library, and we think about demographics, how many are single parents, how many are doing X, Y, and Z, or are looking for jobs, or doing CV writing. The library staff will know all of that. How can we actually use that and plug it into our social value calculator to be able to say, okay, it might cost 600,000 to regenerate a particular library, but actually the social value returns on investment are, and I'm just going to throw a number out, I don't even know what it is because I've not done the maths, but like a 1.2 million a year, that sort of thing. So we do need to be able to demonstrate the value of those community facilities. Now, that's not included within this stage one. It's completely out of scope. I completely agree with Councillor Canavan. We do need to be able to catch that, because those facilities are so fundamentally important to our communities, and we just need to make sure that we are as best placed as we can to be able to demonstrate that. And if we can't fund it as a council, where else can we go to fund that? So we have a funding advisor within our team. She costs me, off the top of my head, about 50,000 a year with on costs, all of the extras that we pay. She's already brought in over £500,000 to the community and voluntary sector through the advice that she has given to them, through the funding papers that she's supported with. So it's that whole sort of model about we need to invest in order to actually save further down the line, because otherwise those individuals that need a library or a community centre, they'll end up being isolated. They'll come in through adult social care or children's social care because they need additional support. So it's that whole spend to save element that we need to get really smart about now, given how tight the purse strings are as a council.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kat. That's great. Did I have anybody else who had spoken who wished to make any comments or ask any questions? No, I'm not seeing anyone. Did anyone have anything they wanted to put forward as a recommendation of this paper? Yes, Councillor Aikenhead, go ahead.
So first of all, I think I'd like to make a recommendation that an action plan is produced for how to take the social value statement beyond procurement to cover all council activities. So I don't know if you want to do
you
that
want to just
first.
Yeah. Officers, would you like to briefly respond to that? The idea of the recommendation on that, is that something you can get? I've got a thumbs up from Kat. Okay, that's good. That's good. Good response. So do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Canavan, thank you. And is there consensus for that as a recommendation? Councillor Beasley.
I haven't heard any mention of the word governance in here, and I think that's absolutely critical.
Okay.
Because it's a
Governance.
free-for-all otherwise. There's no accountability, and there's no continuity and no level playing field.
I think that's a separate point
Yeah.
from what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I think it's a. So do you feel that's bound up within the development of an action plan?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You can't have one without the other, and it's no good having it as a bolt-on tick box that's got to be undertaken. Governance is absolutely key to everything in local government, and for many, many years it wasn't, and it needs to be, because otherwise you are just spending other people's money without any accountability. You're making decisions without any accountability directly to those decisions. Governance is much misunderstood, in my view. And it has to be part and parcel at the centre of any decisions such as this that we're making.
Do you have a suggested amendment to that recommendation then?
Never happy making these decisions on the hoof, frankly.
No, I agree.
And
it's what we have to do.
But I do think that if we're making representations and recommendations to cabinet, we need to be right. And absolutely the vocabulary, the wording is absolutely critical to it.
Councillor Canavan, are you indicating?
Well, I just wondered whether we could, within that wording, say an action, excuse me, an action plan, including an appropriate governance structure, or words to that effect.
Yeah.
So that we're asking, aren't we, for that to
That's
be?
a good idea.
We're asking for that to be included.
Okay, an action plan including details of an appropriate governance structure.
Yep.
Would that satisfy? And then the words that Sue said already.
I'm happy with that.
Yes, that sounds in line with what I was saying.
Good. Great.
As long as that this action plan doesn't then lead to mission creep, which is what I was arguing about earlier on. So we've heard about phase one. So mission creep for me is defined by actually, is it costing us any money? Very broadly. And so we've heard about phase one not costing us any money, but we've heard that phase two is uncertain at the moment. So I would be very concerned if it just led straight into phase two and suddenly it's a budget item.
Councillor Aikenhead.
I would just like to make it clear that my proposal for an action plan does not include any restriction in terms of that it shouldn't cost any money, but that obviously any money should be in the budget. So, but I don't. Well, it's not going to happen this year, is it? In the end, I mean, it's the action plan will happen, but then anyway, I don't think there's. I think that the words that I've got don't specify whether or not it's going to cost money, and when the action plan is made, that's when we'll decide whether it costs money or not. And if there's no money in the budget, then it can't cost any money. So, but I feel that the words we've got probably are okay. As they are.
Did we have a seconder? Yes, Councillor Canavan. Okay. So are we happy with the words we've got? Do we want to have them read out? Happy? Okay, so do we need a show of hands? Perhaps all those in favour of that recommendation?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, and I think, was that everyone? Anyone against? No, Councillor Wright's against, and any abstentions? Okay. Thank you. That one's carried. And then Sue, did you, Councillor,
Yeah.
did you have another point you wanted to make?
Yeah, I have. I'm not so sure about this one because I'm not sure about the answer that I had from the officers, but I'll try it and you can tell me if you're already doing this anyway. I wanted us to recommend to ensure that items that are not monetarised are still taken into account when we're making decisions.
Okay, would you be able to come in on that, Stuart?
The short answer needs to be they won't be taken into account, because otherwise we wouldn't be following the national model. We want to stick true to the national model so that we can directly compare BCP's performance against other councils, other contracting authorities. It's also worth adding for you actually that in summer 25, government led a consultation on, whilst it was only a few months after the introduction of Procurement Act 23, the consultation was about what else can government do to standardise public sector procurement. And one of the things that there was only about 3 or 4 topics on that consultation. One of them seemed to be suggesting that they're actually going to mandate what we have to do with social value. So I think it's highly likely that before too long, government will say, if you're not doing this already, following the national model exactly as we spell it out, then you've got to do it from now on. So that's what I'm expecting. I don't know what the timescale is for that. It's gone silent since that consultation.
So does that mean we can't? So they're just there for information. The
Correct.
things that are zero.
It's for information. Yeah.
Okay, and we can't really do anything unless the government changes it. Can we, or can we?
We can't follow a national model and do what you're proposing, because then that makes it bespoke.
Is that?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Unless anyone else can find a suggestion, I think I'm suggesting something that maybe is too difficult for us to do at the moment, and maybe the government needs to be changing it.
I think the last thing to do to kind of come on to then perhaps is just are we happy? Do we want to say anything about the recommendation so that there is an option given, which is that we follow this government structure, and that's obviously the recommended option in the paper, and the recommendation in the paper is that cabinet approves it. So I'm hearing a bit of dissent potentially from that. So just checking whether people want to make any recommendation different to that, or just leave it.
Can I just say that although I've got a little bit of a dissent to it, I think that on balance I would prefer to follow the government guidance as is, because I recognise that although I'd love to see all the non-monetarised things included, I recognise that would actually be a very difficult piece of work and would probably cost more money than the value that we get out of it right now, unless it was done at a level that's above just this one council. So and it would be a very big piece of work for the government to change it as well. So although I love in the ideal world to see it slightly differently, I'm happy that actually what we've got here is really, really good. So, you know, I'm not dissenting from it in that. I'm just thinking how it could be even better. Okay, so it's a great piece of work, and I'm really pleased to see it come to us.
Thanks, Councillor Aikenhead. I think the last question to ask is, as a board, do we want to support that recommendation that this is adopted by the council? I propose that we do probably want to support that. If anybody is, can I see a show of hands around that? If we could, all those who support that recommendation. Councillor Beazley, you look like you're indicating.
Yes, I am. I just want a point of clarification about the earlier vote you took, because I voted in favour of it on the basis that it was just phase 1. And I'm not, in my own mind, quite clear that I voted with what I think I understood, because I'm not supportive of anything that is likely to result in budget growth. And I wasn't on reflection quite clear as to whether that was included or not. And perhaps the Democratic Services Officer could clarify that, please.
Okay. Could you read back the recommendation again, please? Or not again, but
So the recommendation that was previously voted on was that the ONS board recommends to Cabinet that an action plan including details of an appropriate governance structure is produced to outline how to take the social value statement forward to cover all council activities beyond procurement.
Right. So I think it is related to the next phase, not the current phase, because that's been dealt with by this.
In that case,
paper.
Chairman, I have misunderstood that, and I think it's really important to be clear about that, because I'm not supportive of that, and from what I've said, I clearly am not.
Would you like to change your vote
I very
to
definitely
against?
would, and I would be voting against that.
Okay.
And I think why I'm in difficulty is because the question you've just asked us about supporting the recommendation goes to the very heart of it, and I think reflects exactly that again, doesn't it? In which case I cannot support it.
The recommendation is that the Cabinet approves this social value statement for adoption. So that is about this piece of work around procurement and contract management only, and not about the next phase, which is referred to and has been discussed quite a bit this evening. That's my understanding.
So in terms of supporting that, one has to support option 2 in the options appraisal to do that.
Which refers to a future stage.
Which is the widest interpretation. Thank you very much for your for accommodating my questions. I'm pleased that I've been able to reverse that, because I think it's really important that we're clear. I mean, I know Cabinet will do what Cabinet does anyway, but I think our record is important too.
Yes, of course, absolutely. So if we can just go back to that, we were doing a show of hands on the recommendation. Sorry, Councillor Wright, go ahead.
So is this including Councillor Aikenhead's recommendation that it goes beyond?
We've dealt with that. That's a separate recommendation that we've come up with as a board. But then I've just wanted to ask the board. Sorry.
That's not included.
So there's a recommendation in the paper to approve the social value statement, and that's what we're dealing with now. Previously, we made a recommendation to Cabinet, which I will take to Cabinet and present to them around the action plan and the governance stuff. Yeah. Okay. So just if we can just finish that last bit off, if I could, a show of hands around supporting the recommendation in the paper around the social value statement.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay,
sorry,
and
Councillor Wright, was that a vote in favour?
Okay, so I think that was 9.
No, that's 10 in favour.
Okay.
Unless you.
Let's do it again, guys.
Sorry.
One more time. All those in favour.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay. Thank you. And any against?
2 against.
And any abstentions? None. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you very much, Kat. Thank you very much, Councillor Moore, for your time and your patience waiting. We dealt with the local plan as well. And a really interesting topic. So I'm very grateful to you for bringing it to us. Thank you. We will now move on board to our final item, which is our work plan. And we have a couple of items on this that we do need to cover. You should all have seen the work plan that's attached to the agenda. There are a couple of particular issues that I want to come on to. But I will first of all just check if anyone has any questions about the work plan as it sits now, or in its latest iteration as in the minutes, as in the agenda. Sorry. Councillor Canavan.
So just a quick question on the item that's on the work plan for August about asset transfer and disposal process.
Yeah.
It says Chloe document to be completed, seeking contributions from the board members.
Yeah.
So my question is, do we need to do a Chloe document, and when do we need to do it by?
Yes, we do. And Claire, can you answer when we need to do it by?
The answer to that is probably as soon as
Quite
possible.
soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just so I haven't had confirmation yet that we can go ahead with that at this stage, so it is still to be confirmed. But if we get the Chloe document in as soon as possible, then we'll be able to.
All right, let's go on that then.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So any comments or questions on the work plan as it's other comments or questions on the work plan as it stands? In which case, then I've got a couple of things to raise. The first of which came out in the agenda supplement today, which hopefully you've had a chance to see, but understand if you haven't, that we have had a scrutiny request. So Councillor Keddy has put in a request that we add an item to our work plan, and that is in the agenda supplement. It's a request regarding Charminster Library. I wondered if Councillor Keddy, would you come and sit up with us and just give a brief introduction to your request.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I am requesting an item for scrutiny regarding Charminster Library. So I'm sure you're all aware of the recent developments where there was a ceiling collapse in Charminster Library before Christmas that was going to lead to a short-term closure. As things progressed, more was understood about the problem, and that was pushed out to closure for a couple of months. And then quite suddenly in March, it was announced that the library would be closed for the foreseeable future. The scrutiny I am asking for is of scrutiny of the works and issues leading to the structural damage and closure of Charminster Library and the implications for the rest of the BCP library estate. To give a little more background, just in case, I realised that the supplement was only issued this afternoon. We all live very busy lives, and maybe not everybody has had a chance to fully digest the request. As more information has become available, it has raised questions around, we have known that there are issues with the roof on Charminster Library for a number of years. In not dealing with this in good time, it has led to a progressive situation that's led to the closure that we're experiencing at the moment. We have the presence of unassessed risks, including asbestos and 36 heavy iron radiator units in the ceiling void. Now, this is particularly egregious. These units have been in the library since it was built in the 30s. They're made of iron, and they're roughly the size of that large panel screen. So they weigh somewhere between 70 and 100 kilos. Now, it wasn't a straightforward ceiling collapse that closed the library. It was one of these units breaking loose and falling through the ceiling. Now, there are 36 of these, which by my crude maths adds up to around 3 to 3.5 tons of ironwork in that ceiling. That particular radiator broke loose because of water ingress through an unrepaired roof, which led to the joist rotting away, and then this whole thing has fallen through into an active part of the library where residents and staff could have been present. That is an absolutely dire safety consideration. It really underlines the fact that if we don't deal with repairs in a timely manner, we are moving towards potentially disastrous situations, not only in the loss of service, but really, if we are being objective about this, the potential loss of life for anyone who might have been standing underneath that radiator at the time. So we need to quantify and work out how essential repairs to the library estate can be funded to prevent further degradation of the buildings or increased cost of repair, and to ensure the continuity of service throughout at Charminster Library and the entire BCP library estate. I note that the ONS board has previously taken a keen interest in the library service, particularly in the risks to the library estate due to lack of funding. and that the board made a specific recommendation to Cabinet that consideration should be given to obtaining funding through asset disposal to address the known maintenance and repair needs of our public-facing buildings. That recommendation was made here following the board's examination of the library strategy. And in that schedule, it was noted that Chelmsford Library in particular was in urgent need of significant investment. So we really need to know how we got to this situation with one of our public libraries and how we get out of this situation as well. I have suggested in my request for scrutiny that we could take, potentially the committee could take a rapporteur approach. I understand that there are restrictions on both committee time and scrutiny support from officers. I would be willing to volunteer my time to investigate these issues. In terms of desired outcomes, it is, as I said before, an urgent need to address the issues that have led us to this point and ensure the library can be reopened. I would welcome any suggestions from the committee on how we can make a robust set of lines of inquiry and deliverables. But I would urge the committee to support this request.
Thank you very much, Councillor Keddy. So did anyone have any questions about this or any comments that they'd like to make about this and including this on our potential for including this in our work plan? Councillor Canavan and then Councillor Walters.
Well, I've got a couple of comments. People will recall that we debated the budget when the original budget from the administration was altered on the back of additional revenue coming in through the agreement by the government for council tax flexibility. And within that additional money, which the administration wanted to put straight into reserves, my group moved an amendment which would have put £500,000 into libraries, which would have done part of this. I don't recall many people in this room supporting that amendment. So that's the first point. So in terms of how we got here, well, we got here by neglect.
Can I ask that we stick to not debating the
You asked me for comments, Chair, and
yeah,
I'm making comments.
on including this item in our work plan. Sorry, Councillor Canavan, but
Well,
it is late, and this isn't the
see,
space to have a full debate about
I
Chelmsford
can't
Library.
see any point in putting this in our work plan when we know the answers to the question which this
Okay,
poses.
thank you for that. You don't see the point. Councillor Walters.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I absolutely support adding this to the work plan 100%. In terms of suggestions, it might be worth reaching out to the community and see if we've got anyone who's a bit more independent than not just council staff to help and investigate this alongside you. You know, someone with the expertise to help out. And obviously, we can't assign budget to help you employ someone to do that, but I'm sure there are some people in the community that would love to get involved in that sort of thing.
Did you want to come back in, Councillor Keddy?
If I may, I wrote an open letter to the Chief Executive and asked if we could engage in a form of community tendering, because there are members of the community who have come forward. I've had surveyors, architects, building tradespeople come forward and say they would quite happily do pro bono work. What I found particularly interesting this evening is the whole discussion around social value. And I think I also welcomed Councillor Canavan's example of Chelmsford Library as a source of social value in the community. It's interesting to see how social value and procurement sit hand in hand. At the moment, I don't believe there is a mechanism for us to engage those members of the community. I think our hands end up being tied by local government procurement rules. But if there was a way for us to begin a process of the members of our community with these skills being considered as a social value contribution, then we can start to do something quite transformative. So I would welcome that, but I feel it might be a long route.
My only concern would be about widening the scope of what you're trying to do with this piece of work too much. We always want to try and fix all the problems every time, and we sometimes have to be quite focused. Councillor Canavan.
If we are going to do any scrutiny at all on this, then I would agree with the point that Councillor Walters has just made. The first people that I would want to go to are the Friends of Charminster Library, because they are the community that is most affected by this. So I think, and they would stand a little bit more independent than somebody from this council doing it. So that would be my preference if we are going to go down this route.
Thank you, Councillor Canavan. Councillor Aikenhead.
So I'm just thinking about the way that we pick our scrutiny topics, and coming back to the idea that we need to think about what value we can add as a scrutiny committee. So I think there's two aspects to this work that's being suggested. First of all, there's looking into what happened and what are the implications for other libraries or maybe other buildings. So that's like a preventative. I can certainly see some value in doing that. I think that if we do that, though, we will need officer input into that, because it's about looking at how do we deal with our buildings? What sort of plans do we have for regular maintenance? What sort of inspections do we have to make sure that they're safe? And what sort of budget do we allocate to doing that regular maintenance? Because if you don't do regular maintenance, the roof falls in. We know that happens. So looking at and thinking about the kind of recommendations that could come out of this committee about that changes to those regular maintenance schedules, or introducing them if we don't have them, that could perhaps benefit the council in terms of other buildings as well as just libraries. So I can see some value in that piece of work. I'm not sure how much it compares with the other bits of work, but I think I'm going to be a little bit hard about the issue of how to reopen the library, because in my ward it's a much smaller thing, but there was a swing that broke, and I went around and found the funding and got it all together for them to do a new one. And I think it's absolutely right that Councillor Keddy, if this is a library in his area, will want to do that. But I don't think that needs to be reported to our committee. I think we all support the idea that going around finding the funding to reopen it is important. But I don't think that this committee can add value to that work. Okay, so that I'm saying that I think that really the scope of this work should be more narrowed down and separated from the ward projects, which we all have in our wards.
I hear what you're saying, and I think you're right to make those distinctions between those areas of potential scrutiny. Although I would argue that, I mean, you did admit that your example was somewhat smaller, and a library, although it sits in a ward, it doesn't just serve a ward. I'm going to say that as councillor for Moordown, which doesn't have a library in it, but therefore residents of Moordown use Charminster Library. So, and I think one of the things we do know about Charminster Library is one of the busiest libraries in the whole conurbation. So I know it doesn't serve the whole of BCP, but it is quite a significant place for wider than just a single ward. However, I personally take on board what you're saying, and I think the key lines of inquiry would need to reflect that. I think one of the things we need to do if we accept this onto our work plan is work up some key lines of inquiry, and I suggest perhaps if anybody is willing to work with Councillor Keddy on doing that, then they should possibly put themselves forward if we agree to put this on the work plan, which is obviously what we've got to do first. So I think the proposal in your request form, Councillor Keddy, is to, as you said, take a rapporteur approach, which, just to clarify on that, would involve going to officers within relevant services directorates, but wouldn't take up scrutiny support time, which is what we're so short of in terms of, you know, setting up bits of in-depth work. But the rapporteur approach means that we're not taking that resource. It's member led, but it does, of course, it will need officer input, and others have said about non-council input as well, community input and different organisations, which are equally important. I think you suggested taking that approach and a timeline that would bring it back to this committee potentially in September. That would be a bit of a pencil, I think, depending on other priorities. But given that it's come up in the last couple of months since our last meeting as an issue, I think it does warrant consideration to be added to the work plan as a sort of unexpected and quite significant piece of work that we could look at. Did I miss anyone else? Yes, Councillor Deadman.
Well, yes, thank you, Chairman. It's that last bit about secure the future of Charminster Library and the further BCP library estate. But I think there are quite a few buildings that we've in Highcliffe, for example, we've got an old day centre, which needs, something needs to be sorted about it. I think it's the further BCP estate of buildings, because this is what's happened, isn't it? That we think it hasn't been maintained. It might well have been maintained brilliantly, but it looks as though it might not have been. So yes, if we could, but would that make it too wide a scope?
No, I don't think, not necessarily, because I think again, the lessons coming out of it, and actually what we'd want as a scrutiny body is any lessons as widely applicable as possible, really. So, but I think it could be I think that could be adjusted. And Councillor Keddy, do you feel the same way, that when we're talking about the wider estate, we could say the public-facing buildings, as we did last time when we ended up talking about what we wanted to see happen in terms of libraries, buildings, maintenance?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, and it's one that crossed my mind. And it was really, as you said, a question of scope. My concern is that we have a library strategy that doesn't have a funding stream as I understand it, and I'm concerned that given the age of a lot of buildings in the library estate, that this isn't an isolated case. But of course, you're right, this may not be an isolated case across our entire BCP capital estate. And the danger is, if we, through neglect and lack of repair, allow these buildings to degrade over time, this is a solution may cost hundreds of thousands. The cost to BCP, if we allow our buildings to crumble into the ground, could be millions or tens of millions. So it's a scoping question. There's no reason why the lessons learned here couldn't be applied to the wider estate, and the library estate is used as a case study.
Can I suggest then, I would personally support adding this to the work plan. I would think the next step is to develop the key lines of inquiry. And can I see if anyone else would like to support Councillor Keddy with that bit, that next part? So we've got great Councillor Macro, Councillor Walters, Councillor Trent. So you've got a little team there.
Wow.
So if you guys could work up some key lines of inquiry, then we can make sure that as a board that we're really happy about the scope of that piece of work and take that forward. Does that make sense? Happy? Councillor Beasley.
I just make the point that I think using it as a case study is a good idea, because it isn't just about libraries, but we see in this document here that the backlog maintenance in the library estate of £1.8 million, I feel confident that that is probably significantly understated, actually, in practical terms. and we might be frightened by what comes out of the backlog maintenance issue across our entire estate anyway. And so it's always going to be hand to mouth. So I'd be concerned if we were raising expectations as to what could be done about it at a time when the council is looking to raise somewhere of the order of £35 million out of asset sales over the next few years. But I do think that the library service is, for all councillors, particularly if they've got one in their own ward, a special case. And what's happened here in this library could easily happen in every other library in the estate. And therefore, we're, in our minds, if we've got a library, we're thinking about that library right now, aren't we?
And we've all got one, because all our residents use libraries.
Indeed. And you're absolutely right. It isn't just where it is, it covers a much wider area. So I think careful thought needs to be given as to where do we want to end up with this? Because we could spend lots of time on it and find that actually we achieved very little, even though we've said a lot. So I think that is the first question, not to be determined tonight, but I think it does need to be determined, because otherwise it won't have the focus it needs to have.
Agreed, and I think that's the next step, to work up some key lands of inquiry and then have those. I might see if we can circulate those between meetings rather than having to wait till the next meeting to bring them back, and we'll see how we go with that. Because I think it is an issue very live right now that needs to be taken forward, probably, as soon as possible. And if Councillor Kelly's offering to do the legwork, then we shouldn't turn down that offer of resource, really. Is that okay? We agreed? You happy? Okay, lovely. Sorry everybody, I know you're desperate to go. The other thing is just to mention that the in-depth scrutiny, the ONS chairs and vice chairs group has considered all the proposals that has come out of all the work programming for in-depth scrutiny across each committee, and agreed an order of progression, which is to start with, because it's already underway, the environment and place topic of van life, to move on to a joint piece of work between children's and the health and adult social care committees on children's wellbeing. By that point, we'll be well into budget scrutiny, so that becomes our next priority in the calendar. And finally, to finish with the ONS board's chosen topic, which was residence parking. And that's our year's kind of calendar of in-depth scrutiny. So I just wanted to let you know about that. If you have any major concerns, I think probably come to me and we'll talk about them, rather than, because I think everyone's probably very keen to go home. So unless there's anything else anyone needs to say, I will close the meeting.
Chair, just on that,
Go ahead,
just on the residence parking, although it's the last thing on that list at the moment, we have got a ONS board briefing arranged for the 1st of June, which will be on residence parking. So that will hopefully get the ball rolling, and there might be some work that members can do from that. So
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks everyone.
Okay. Thank you all very much for all your efforts this evening, and I close the meeting. Good night.